This page is the front cover, and it's all about Banjo-Tooie, which is fair enough as everyone was waiting for that one. They've boldly claimed, "We've finished it," which is what you want to hear. There's a stop press, promising to reveal how to unlock new areas in the original Banjo-Kazooie, digging into the past a bit there. Sin and Punishment is hyped as Nintendo's dazzling new shooter. That was a bit of a strange one to see on the N64, very Japanese. They're teasing latest shots of Dinosaur Planet, Mario Party 3, Pokemon Stadium G/S, and Indiana Jones. Down the bottom it shouts about PLUS, Planet Game Boy Pokemon Gold/Silver, boasting about the first review in the original and best Game Boy mag. Kiss, bit cheeky, and a free bumper tips guide inside for more top games in the issue, and all for £3.30, issue number 51, dated February 2001. They even mention their website, dailyradar.co.uk, back when websites were still a bit novel on magazines. Classic N64 mag cover. This page is the first page of issue 51 of N64 Magazine, dated February 2001. It's the welcome page, setting the scene for the whole magazine. Down the side you've got the staff list, editor Andrea Ball, deputy editor Mark Green, all the usual names. The main article is about how N64 Magazine is the biggest and best for Nintendo news, focusing on getting info from Japan and America first, and promising honest reviews, none of that paid for rubbish. They mention import games, which was a big thing back then if you were a proper N64 fan, getting games early from Japan or the US. They're highlighting Import Heaven, and talking about Sin and Punishment, that shooter from Treasure, which looked absolutely mental even in screenshots. Proper Japanese craziness. They've even got a how-to import guide, which was actually pretty useful back in the day if you wanted to play those NTSC games on your UK telly. Then there's little boxes teasing what's inside, Banjo-Kazooie cheat codes, Sin and Punishment again, Banjo-Tooie, Dinosaur Planet, which was rare, trying something different, and even Pokemon Gold/Silver on the Game Boy Color, a bit off topic for N64 but still mega popular. And right at the bottom they're saying next issue will be fantastic, jump to page 96 to find out why, always trying to keep you hooked. This page is the contents page for issue 51, February 2001 of N64 Magazine. Right at the top in big letters it says Contents, in a sort of red splattered font, can't miss it. It's got the magazine's title across the top, N64, the UK's best-selling independent Nintendo mag. A bit of boasting there, but fair enough, it was a decent mag back in the day. Lagan. It's split into sections as usual. First up is Planet 64 inches starting on page 10, with News Desk promising new hope for UK gamers. Always a bit optimistic, weren't they? Then, coming soon, on page 16, with stunning new shots and mouth-watering info on the latest N64 games. Gotta love the hype. Under that, we've got a section on Pokemon Stadium Gold/Silver, on page 16, boasting 251 Pokemon Battle It Out new shots. Pokemon was massive then, still is I suppose. Then there's Aiden Chronicles on page 18, labelled eye-popping new pictures of the N64's first proper RPG. Proper RPG. Bit of a stretch maybe, it was alright, not mind-blowing. And finally for Planet 64, Dance Dance Revolution on page 19, Waltz, with Walt's friends. First shots, Dance Dance Revolution on the N64, madness. Next section is N64 Arena starting on page 36, for the reviews and that. UK releases, reviewed, rated, and completed. First up is Tigger's Honey Hunt, on page 38, another round of 2D platforming from the Disney factory. Is it sweet as honey, or total poo sticks? Rustics, cheeky. Then, Rugrats in Paris, on page 41, Tommy, Chucky and Company. Return to the N64. Can they help us forget the treasure hunt travesty? Rugrat, treasure hunt, yeah that wasn't great was it Shrucker? Then we've got Import Arena, starting on page 42, the latest Japanese and American games. First game is Sin and Punishment, on page 42. Frenetic shooting from the folk behind Mischief Makers. Sin and Punishment, now that was a bit special, proper Japanese shooter, we didn't see many like that over here. Gear. Lastly, Regulars, on page 96, talking about N64 Magazine issue 52. What treats await you next issue? Find out here. Always trying to get you to buy the next one. Down at the bottom left, there's a little section for Pokemon Gold/Silver on the Game Boy, on page 4. They're back, and this time it's even better than before. Game Boy Color Pokemon games, massive at the time. And that's the contents page, sets you up for what's inside the mag. Looks like a decent issue, covering all the bases with news, previews, reviews and imports. This page is the contents page for N64 Magazine from February 2001. Right at the top, it's hyping up a future look section for big new N64 games, kicking off on page 6. They've got Dinosaur Planet, Rare's GOBS Macking RPG, which I remember was getting a lot of buzz, and Mario Party 3, promising minigame-fueled mayhem. Those Mario Party games were always a laugh, weren't they? Chew. Below that, there's the Club 64 Inches reader service, with the mailbox section on page 54, dealing with the bulging postbag. Always good to see what other readers were thinking. Then it's a how-to section about seeing things you shouldn't in perfect dark, sending that big-eared rodent to the zoo, whatever that's about. On page 58, perfect dark was still being picked apart for secrets back then, naturally. Mickey's Speedway USA gets a mention for playing import N64 games on page 64 and 68. Import games were always a bit of a novelty. Then there are the regular bits like Tips Extra for Banjo-Kazooie codes and more, Game On encouraging you to dust off your older games, and I'm the Best, where people could presumably prove they were, well, the best. Skill Club Millennium is mentioned, sounds like some exclusive club, and good old Dr. Kit's Game Clinic for gaming solutions. There's a directory to the best N64 games, and a reminder about back issues and subscriptions. EA. The big feature on this page is Special Investigation Banjo-Tooie. They've got their hands on a finished copy of Rare's platformer, promising to cover every level of the sequel. Banjo-Tooie was massive, everyone was keen for that. And lastly, there's Clocktown Tribune for Majora's Mask, catching news from Clocktown and seeing what residents think of Link. A bit of fun role-playing there, I suppose. All in all, a pretty standard contents page for the time, setting up what's inside the issue. This page is all about future N64 releases. Exciting stuff back then, eh? At the top it's hyping up Dinosaur Planet, calling it Rare's masterpiece in waiting. Bold claim. There's a screenshot with Crystal, who looks quite lovely. Wondering where her pterodactyl mate is though. Cheeky. Apparently no jet bike multiplayer against a mate. Bit of a shame that. They're even joking about exploring a nasty fella's alimentary canal. Charming. Sounds like classic Rare humor if you ask me. Below that is Mario Party 3, saying it's the latest shots of Nintendo's new party game. Mario Party was always good for a laugh, especially with mates round, though you might lose a controller or two in the process. Looks like they're giving Dinosaur Planet a 6 out of 10, and Mario Party 3 an 8 out of 10 in terms of anticipation, so they're more hyped for the party game it seems. There's an info burst section for Dinosaur Planet with all the details. It's from Rare, naturally. Cart size is 512 megabits, single player, no controller pack needed, but expansion pack and rumble pack are yes, transfer pack is no. Release date is TBA for all regions, and they've given it a full 5 red blobs for anticipation rating, so they're really looking forward to that one, despite the score above being 6. Bit confusing, but hey, it's magazines for ya. Warrington Norse, and on the right side there's a big sketched character, looks a bit like a wise old Warrington Norse creature. Not sure what that's all about, maybe related to Dinosaur Planet? Maybe just a cool drawing to fill the space. Overall, standard preview page really, getting us excited for what's coming on the old N64. This page is all about Dinosaur Planet. Right then, seems like they were reporting on it back in issue 43, expecting it by the end of 2000, but here we are in February 2001, and it's still not out. Typical. Anyway, good news is Rare is still on it, even though rumors were flying about it moving to the GameCube. Some spokesperson assured everyone they're still working on the N64 version, thank goodness. Aka. The article reckons we should forget about waiting for it, because when Dinosaur Planet finally arrives, it's gonna blow our socks off with its massive worlds and Zelda-like gameplay. They even say it's by the same lot who did Jet Force Gemini, which is a fair comparison. You can see the Rare DNA in it. They mention Saber and Crystal as playable characters, like Juno and Vela from Jet Force, and there's even a jet bike section, but on ice and sand instead of alien planets. One level has you exploring inside a massive monster, which sounds a bit grim but intriguing. Visually, they're raving about the facial expressions of the characters, saying every individual wiggles their mouth and shifts expressions in sync with speech. Fancy that. Gameplay-wise, they mention Crystal fighting with a stick, Zelda-style Z-targeting, and dodging laser grids. You'll also get dinosaur sidekicks, Tricky and Kite, to help with puzzles and secrets. They've seen 3 levels so far: Warlock Mountain, Swaptone Hollow, and Discovery Falls, and reckon they all look pretty sophisticated. They are banging on about the cinematic quality, which they say is staggering, and the shadows and reflections that change with the time of day, much like Zelda. Levels are huge apparently, like you could spot a forest or hut in the distance, and actually go there. Weak point for bosses is a giant eye, classic Rare move that, always with the massive eyeballs, And Crystal's stick is lethal, apparently. They think it will be out around September in the US and December here in the UK, hoping to see it before Mario Party 3 and Pokémon Stadium Gold/Silver consume everyone's lives. They're clearly excited about it, saying there'll be more info coming soon. Sounds promising. Let's hope it lives up to the hype. This page is all about Mario Party 3. Blimey, another one already. According to the info burst thingy, it's from Nintendo, a chunky 128 megabit cart. For up to 4 players, Rumble Pack is in, but no controller pack or expansion pack needed, so that's good. It's already out in Japan apparently, but TBA for us, and the Yanks. Typical. And look at that anticipation rating, 5 red circles, they're well up for it. Beige. Right. The article reckons this Mario Party 3 is the last one we'll see on the N64. A bit sad really, end of an era and all that. But they do say it's guaranteed to be a good party game, which is what you expect from Mario Party really. They mention there's a new multiplayer mode where you team up with computer-controlled characters, like Bob-ombs and Boos. Sounds a bit chaotic but could be fun. Apparently there are 70 new minigames, some new, some based on older Mario Party games. Can't complain about that, more minigames is always good. They're banging on about the 7 themed boards again, saying there's never a dull moment, which might be pushing it a bit, but they're usually decent fun. They mention some boards are based on Mario Golf, and there's a 2D button bashing race that's like retro Super Mario Land, fingers will bleed no doubt, if that's anything like the old Mario games. And they're loving the Paper Mario style scenery in some of the shots, saying it's very Paper Mario, which is fair enough, it does look quite nice. Warny. There's a bit about aiming a hose in one minigame and hammering the A button to launch a rocket in another. Yeah, sounds like classic Mario Party minigame madness. And they point out the obligatory slippery slidey ice board, with giant snowmen, of course there is. Wouldn't be Mario Party without an ice level, would it? Another screenshot shows a matching game, with Bob-ombs not helping. Cheeky Bob-ombs. They're even saying there's a nod to Mario Tennis, and Waluigi and Daisy are playable for the first time. So yeah, sounds like more of the same Mario Party fun really, but with new boards and minigames, and a cartoon look with cardboard scenery. Can't argue with that, good bit of multiplayer fun for the N64 before we all move on to whatever is next. This page is a look at Mario Party 3, seems like they are getting us hyped for it. 70 minigames on offer apparently, blimey that's a lot isn't it? They reckon every single one is a winner, which is a bold claim, we'll see about that when it comes out. They are banging on about chasing chickens in a 2-player minigame being tremendous fun, and Luigi getting clobbered in a snowball game, looks alright I suppose. Apparently there's also a chance to pump Toad's face full of bullets, which sounds a bit much even for Mario Party if you ask me. Maybe they are being sarcastic there, you never know with these mags. Graphically it's mentioned the characters have heavy black outlines, like Paper Mario they say, which is fair enough. They're talking about impressive camera angles in a minecart race and fast third-person stuff on a farm minigame. Sounds like they're trying to make it sound more exciting than it is, typical magazine spiel isn't it? The boards are supposedly prettier and more animated than before, which would be welcome, the old ones were a bit static to be fair. Minigames are still straightforward, and Hudson's still churning them out, no surprise there. Snowball rolling competition and a nightmarish palm tree game, not sure what that's about. Bumper Balls is back, that was always a laugh I suppose. They mention it's doing well in the Japanese charts. Release date is sometime around November they reckon for the UK. They are promising a full review in issue 52, so we'll have to wait till then to see if it's any good. Even the options screen has been polished up apparently, not exactly groundbreaking stuff is it? Still, Mario Party 3 could be a decent laugh with mates, we'll see. This page is from the news section, Planet 64 News Desk. It's all about Nintendo taking direct control of their UK operations. Apparently they've been using a distributor called DHE for ages to handle sales and marketing of N64 and Game Boy games in Britain. But it seems Nintendo weren't happy, and have decided to set up their own dedicated UK office. Bit of a shock move according to the article, and it sounds like it happened at the start of 2001. They mention that DHE, the distributor, was part of a bigger group, John Menzies. David McKay from Menzies seems pretty reasonable about it, saying they shook hands and wished each other good luck. But Nintendo's side of the story sounds a bit more like they were wrestling control back, so maybe it wasn't all that amicable. The article quotes Shelley Friend from Nintendo of Europe, saying Britain is a crucial market for them, and they want to be able to market directly to shops and the press without a middleman. They're expecting big things for Pokémon Gold and Silver, Game Boy Advance and GameCube, and this move is supposed to help with the launches of those. Sounds like they are keen to push their own consoles and games more heavily, and think this will give them better control and focus, especially in the run-up to the GameCube launch. They reckon it's a behind-the-scenes shift, but expect consumers will see more effort put into marketing games. They are definitely talking it up, as Nintendo being serious about reclaiming their crown as king of the consoles. Bold words. It'll be interesting to see if this made a difference to how things played out. This page kicks off with some shortcuts news. Seems like the Game Boy Color was doing surprisingly well in Japan, even outselling the PlayStation 2 for a bit, which is a bit mad when you think about it. There's also a bit about Nintendo asking shops to hold off on GameCube pre-orders until they sort their own system out. Bit of a mess around that launch, wasn't it? And lastly in this section they're chatting about a Nightmare Creatures movie, directed by the guy who did Disney's Dinosaur. Said it's meant to be scarier, which, considering Dinosaur, probably wasn't hard. There's a screenshot from Nightmare Creatures, looks as grim as I remember. Then there's the history section, going through some of the N64's ups and downs. It mentions the initial rush for the console, selling out its UK allocation on day one, back in '97. Price drops happened pretty quickly, down to £150, then even cheaper to £99.99. Zelda, Ocarina of Time caused shortages. No surprise there, everyone wanted that one. Apparently they underestimated demand for Mario Party Classic Nintendo there. Then it mentions Smash Bros finally getting a UK release after a campaign. Shows you how things were back then, eh? Pokémon obviously sold loads, and Perfect Dark apparently topped the charts when it came out. Right at the end it says Nintendo finally set up a dedicated UK office. Took them long enough? At the bottom there's a big advert for the Tips helpline. Classic magazine thing, pay a premium rate number for game hints. Open from 8 AM to 11 PM, 7 days a week costing £1.50 a minute. Daylight robbery, but we probably used it back then, didn't we? They list a load of games they give tips for. Mickey's Speedway USA, Majora's Mask, Pokemon Snap, Perfect Dark, Mario Party 2, Rush 2049, Ocarina of Time, Donkey Kong 64, and Pokemon Stadium and loads more. So basically, if you were stuck on any of the big N64 titles, they were there to take your money, and maybe help you out. There's a picture of Mickey Mouse in a car, and a purple see-through N64 console and controller to jazz it up, and some small print about call costs and complaints. The usual guff. This page is a bit of an odd one, talking about Game Boy and fashion, which is not something you saw every day back then. Apparently Nintendo teamed up with some British fashion designers to create Game Boy themed shoes and accessories. They're calling it a style campaign and it's all a bit urban, funky, must-have. Right, the article mentions a few designers like Marcus Lupfer, Tristan Weber and Julian MacDonald, all working on Game Boy pouches, holders, and these rather outrageous shoes. There's a picture of a purple shoe that's described as being one of the last to be finished, and another design by Tristan Weber that's got space for your Game Boy cartridges handy, I suppose, if you wanted to look like you're smuggling games on your feet. There's even a yellow shoe with a Pikachu glued into it. Little Pika's got his own space inside the yellow shoe. Isn't he the cutest? They're really going for it here. Apparently Nintendo even had a color therapist, who came up with feelings for the 6 Game Boy colors. Cerise is for passion and lust, turquoise is communication and cleanliness, yellow is brightness and madness, purple is moody and regal, lime green is optimism and new life, and clear purple is cynical and efficient. Sounds like someone had a bit too much time on their hands at Nintendo HQ. There are also a few little news bits dotted around. One is about the GameCube name, and how Nintendo are being very specific that it should be called Nintendo GameCube, not just GameCube and definitely not NGC. Another is about Nintendo winning a court case against websites cashing in on their name, which is fair enough I suppose, stopping those domain squatters. And finally they're talking about Game Boy Advance sales projections, predicting 24 million units in the first year, with 1 million just for the Japanese launch. They're comparing it to the PS2's predicted 3 million first-year sales, and pointing out the Game Boy has a lot to live up to, given the original Game Boy and Game Boy Color had sold over 100 million units. Lofty ambitions indeed, but it was Nintendo, they usually knew what they were doing. This page in the magazine is all about Pokemon Crystal hitting Japan. Seems like it's from their regular Pokemon Club section called Celadon Times. Pikachu paper. Bit cheesy, isn't it? Anyway, they're saying Crystal is like the next big thing after Gold and Silver, comparing it to Pokemon Yellow from back in the day with Red and Blue. Apparently it's not just a simple rehash like Yellow was, but actually quite different. Saf, the main buzz is about this mobile adapter thingy that lets you link up your Game Boy to your mobile phone to trade and battle other players. Sounds a bit ahead of its time for back then, didn't really take off much here, did it? They're also saying it'll let you get hold of rare Pokemon like Celebi and Mew through this mobile connection. They're also hinting that because of this mobile phone business, it's unlikely to make it over to the UK, which is a bit of a downer if you were looking forward to that feature. Story-wise, they mention Suicune and those weird unknown Pokemon being involved, and there's a new female character who's on a quest. Apparently there's a new enemy called Minaki, and this girl is trying to find Suicune and figure out the mystery of the unknown. She's got a new backpack and a poker gear that lets her use new items, and even a DJ called Hello AOI, who gives her tips over the radio. Bit much, isn't it? They're also banging on about improved graphics and a revamped map for this female character. Small upgrades, really. Petater. There's a little box with a trainer card for someone called Chris showing their badges and sprite. Nothing too exciting there. And lastly, there's a little promo thing saying you can win a Tempest TCG pack if you turn the page. Classic magazine filler that. Standard Pokemon news, really, keeping everyone hyped for the next game. This page showcases the latest Pokemon merchandise hitting the shelves back in the day. Must be early 2001 looking at it. It's titled Pokemon New Goods, and it's all about parting you from your pocket money on, well, Pokemon Tap really. Tiki. First up is the Tempest gift box for the Pokemon trading card game, from Wizards of the Coast no less. Bit of a mouthful, that name. They reckon if you're a fan of the card game, this is a decent enough starter set. It's got water and lightning energy themed cards, booster packs, a special coin, a velvety card case, a playmat, and even a CD-ROM to teach you the basics. Goodness, a CD-ROM. Fancy. They give it 90%, which is pretty generous for what's essentially just cards in a box. Then there's the official Pokemon Annual, apparently good for young and uninitiated Pokemon fans, so basically kids then. It's got stories, a Pokedex, mazes, and colouring in stuff to keep them occupied, which is probably better than staring at a Game Boy screen all day, I suppose. They give it 75%, seems fair. Good. Next, we've got a Pokemon toothbrush, a purple toothbrush, no less, with Pokemon written on the handle, and a Pikachu base to stand it up. They are being a bit sarcastic about this, saying dental hygiene is important, but it's not exactly AWE inspiring. 78% for a toothbrush, blimey. Then it's the Pokemon Pod. This is a Pokeball that opens up to reveal a rubber-lined interior, where you can shove plasticine. You can mold Pokemon characters with it: Charmander, Pikachu, Gengar, Poliwhirl, the usual suspects. They reckon it's a bit dull after a couple of Bulbasaur moldings, giving it 71%. Sounds about right. Following on is the Pokemon Jammer, from Tiger Electronics. Remember them? Used to make those handheld LCD games. This is a marble launcher shaped like a Pokeball, and it makes noises. Apparently it sounds like a New York cab driver, which is a bit odd. They rate it 82% for throwing marbles. Right then. Roy. Lastly, there's the Pokemon Marble Launcher, a proper rotating marble launcher with Pokemon character marbles. They say it's a stylish update on the classic marbles game, and you can trade and collect the marbles too. Another 90% rating. Someone's feeling generous with the percentages here. Down at the bottom there's a competition to win Tempest TCG box sets. You have to answer the question, which of these is responsible for the awesome TCG phenomenon? And the options are Warlock of the Beach, Wizards of the Coast, or Sorcerer of the Seaside. Well, they literally just mentioned Wizards of the Coast as being behind the Tempest gift box at the top of the page, so it's not exactly rocket science, is it? The next page showcases Pokemon Stadium Gold/Silver, and blimey, we were all waiting for this one, weren't we? Right then, it's builders coming soon, and they're updating us on N64 games of the future. Very dramatic. There's a Q&A bit where someone's asking about leagues, and the magazine's saying that Nintendo are finally going to put some effort into pushing their stuff in the UK. Which is about time, frankly. They're hoping we'll get the extras that the PAL version usually misses out on, which would be a nice surprise, wouldn't it? There's also a bit about item collection being more of a thing in this one, which is fair enough. More bonuses and rewards for minigames to boost your Pokemon. The info burst box gives us the basic details. It's from Nintendo, obviously. 256 megabits cart, 1 to 4 players, no controller, expansion or rumble packs needed, but it uses the transfer pack, naturally, to get your Pokemon from the Game Boy games. Release dates are listed as March for the US, TBA for us in the UK, and already out in Japan. Typical. They always get it first. Anticipation rating is 4 out of 5 Red Balls, so they're clearly excited. Bessie. The main article itself talks about the long wait for this wave of poker fever, especially for us Brits, compared to the lucky Japanese and Americans who already had the Game Boy versions. They reckon this stadium game will be essential for N64 owners. Main articles. They mention that it's got all new animations for all 251 Pokemon, which is quite a lot of polygons, I suppose, for the N64. They're tweaking things, attacks will be more visible, and they've even got impressive fainting sequences, which sounds a bit morbid for Pokemon, doesn't it? New features include a top-down racing game, a bit like Super Sprint, but with Donphan. And they're promising proper Pokemon leagues like the extra tournaments that America and Japan got with Mario Tennis and Golf. They are promising a review of the Japanese version in the next issue, so we'll see if it lives up to the hype then. Visually, there are screenshots of battles with Pokemon like Who looking rather yellow, and a minigame with what looks like Pikachus running around a roof. And another shot of Ghastly doing its spooky thing. Standard Pokemon Stadium fare really, but in color, this time I suppose. This page is a preview for Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine on the N64. They're billing it as a bit of a Zelda meets Tomb Raider affair, which back then sounded pretty decent. They are making a big deal out of the lighting effects, saying they're proper lush, something you wouldn't normally see outside of a top-end PC at the time. LucasArts are using their MusicX tools for the sound, which is good to hear, as music can make or break these adventure games. There's talk of driving around in a 4x4, which is a first for indie really. They're promising puzzles, and some off-roading bits, even running over wild coyotes apparently, which is a bit much, isn't it? It mentions that the PC version had control issues, something about Indy going from standing still to full pelt with no in-between, and pixel-perfect jumps causing loads of deaths. Sounds a right pain, but they reckon they've sorted all that for the N64. There's a Q&A section where they mention the game is set in loads of exotic locations, like Chanshan Mountain in Kazakhstan, the Tower of Babel, the Tomb of King Nub, and the Aztec pyramids. Blimey, they're not holding back, are they? And yes, apparently there will be minecart rides, because, well, it wouldn't be indie without them, would it? There's also a little info box stating it's a 128 megabit cartridge, one player only, Rumble and expansion packs are yes, and transfer pack is no. Release dates are TBA for the UK and Japan, but it's out now in the US. Anticipation rating is a solid 4 red blobs out of 5, so they're clearly quite excited for it. This page is a real blast from the past, isn't it? It's showcasing two very different games. First up, we've got Aiden Chronicles, the first mage. It looks like they're previewing it here, calling it a proper RPG, which on the N64 was always a bit of a rarity, wasn't it? They're saying the animation is good and it's pretty colourful. The screenshots do look quite nice for the time, showing off some outdoor environments and characters. They mention it's a classic tale about a squire named Alaron trying to save the world, with wizards and bards thrown in. Sounds a bit typical RPG fare, but they hint at a day and night cycle affecting gameplay, which was quite ambitious back then. They're comparing the combat system to Ogre Battle and Hybrid Heaven, which are decent games, so that's a good sign. They even suggest you might be needing a boat at some point. No release date yet, just TBA for both Japan and the UK, but March 2001 is mentioned as an anticipation rating, so it was probably expected around then. Then on the other side of the page, it's WCW Backstage Assault. Completely different beast, this. They're talking about backstage brawls, no ring, no rules. Sounds like a bit of a button masher, to be honest. They say it's coming to the States only, initially, but wink wink, nudge nudge, you could always import it if you were desperate, eh? They mention it's a turning point for wrestling games because there are no rules, and they've settled on a control system similar to WrestleMania and No Mercy, but with the buttons switched around, why do they always do that? They've got a stamina meter and a momentum meter now, and apparently you can turn on realism in the options, which just means blood. Lovely. They mention a hardcore gauntlet mode with 7 opponents in a row. Sounds like a proper test of endurance. Look out for a review next month, they say. So, two very different games being previewed here, one a fantasy RPG, and the other a chaotic wrestling game. Quite a contrast on one page. This page is about Dance Dance Revolution, Disney style, for the N64. Right then, so they've got this game Dance Dance Revolution Disney mix, splashed all over it, big purple letters. Seems like they were showing it off at some game show in Tokyo. It's basically DDR but with Mickey Mouse and pals. You use a dance mat controller, bit of plastic thing, and you stomp on the arrows in time to Disney tunes. They reckon it was surprisingly popular, cues of Japanese kids getting their groove on. I can imagine. Bit of a laugh really. There are screenshots of the game with Huey, Dewey and Louie, those cheeky ducklings, and Pluto. Apparently Pluto's dance moves are a bit rubbish according to the article. Which is a bit harsh, isn't it? They mention you have to solve jigsaw puzzles to unlock new Disney songs. Sounds a bit daft. They say there are about a dozen songs in total. When You Wish Upon a Star and Bare Necessities type stuff. Jazzed up versions, of course. There's a little Q&A bit where someone asks about being a terrible dancer, and the mag says don't worry, you just get a low score. but the Disney characters will be more excited if you dance well. Another question is why Konami can't make Metal Gear Solid instead, to which they just say, "Good question, cheeky. Checkhacker." Then there's an info burst table, you know the kind, with all the techie details. It's from Konami, 128 megabit cart, 1 to 4 players, and no controller park, rumble park or transfer park support. It was due out in Japan in January, and TBA for the UK and US at the time. They give it a 3 out of 5 anticipation rating, so not exactly setting the world on fire then. There's also a bit about Nintendo Net, talking about the internet and online gaming, which was still a bit new for consoles back then. They're rumbling on about the GameCube and how it might be delayed and how hard it is to develop for, which sounds like typical Games Mag rumor mill stuff. They mentioned the Xbox coming out later in 2001 as well, and how Nintendo need to get their act together. They're saying the GameCube can do 14 million polygons, and the PlayStation 2 can only do 10 million. Bit of a numbers game, isn't it? They finish by saying EA are bringing snowboarding game SSX to the GameCube, plus a mountain biking game, a Madden game and FIFA. Standard stuff. Written by some bloke called Jess Bickham, Nintendo channel editor for Daily Radar UK. Dated February 2001, issue 19. The next page is diving deep into Banjo-Tooie. Proper exciting this was back then, everyone was hyped for this one. How it works explains the Jiggy collecting gameplay, saying it's like the first one, Banjo-Kazooie, but bigger, with 100 Jiggies scattered across 8 main levels and the ILO Hags hub area. They make it sound like it's not going to be a walk in the park to complete. Definitely not a lunchtime job, which, knowing Rare, was probably spot on. There are a few screenshots dotted around. One shows the jigsaw puzzle in Jiggy Wiggy's temple, saying it moves, so it's not easy, cheeky hint there. Another shows Witchy World, the amusement park level. We knew about that one. Looked a bit darker than the usual Banjo fare. There's also a shot of Banjo as a bee, mentioning Mumbo transforming you, and you can fly anywhere after. And another one pointing out tread marks from Gruntilda's machine, the one that did for Bottles, saying to avenge him, bit dramatic, but it got you going. And finally, a picture of Mumbo saying he tells you how many Jiggies you've got but where's his mouth, haha, classic Rare humor. The info burst bit at the bottom left gives the details. Cart size is 256 megabit, 1 to 4 players, no controller or expansion pack needed, rumble pack yes, transfer pack no. Release dates are down as now in the US, April in the UK, and TBA for Japan. Anticipation rating is 5 out of 5 little orange blobs, so yeah, pretty hyped then. The main article talks about it being out in the US, and they finished it on a US cart. They'd been to Rare's HQ in Twycross, proper local for them, must have been a good day out. They mention Mickey Speedway, USA being out of the way, so Rare could knuckle down on Banjo-Tooie. They talk about rescuing Dinosaur Planet, which eventually became Star Fox Adventures on the GameCube. Bit of a different beast in the end. They mention wordplay into Conker, which is a bit of a nod to the raunchier side of Rare later on. They got a completed Banjo-Tooie cart through secret Rare methods, and it's got loads of locked areas. They reckon Rare is set to give Nintendo, Donkey Kong 64, and Mario a run for their money. Bit bold that, but we all hoped so, didn't we? This page is all about Banjo-Tooie, that much anticipated sequel to Banjo-Kazooie. It's part of an N64 special investigation, bit dramatic aren't they? It's from February 2001, so we were all proper gagging for this game by then. Ooh. There's a section called Meet and Greet, which introduces some of the characters we'll be bumping into. We've got Jam Jars, Bottles' brother who's now teaching us moves since Bottles, well bless him, isn't around anymore. Then there's Klungo, still that loyal, if a bit useless, sidekick to Gruntilda, causing bother with his potions. Mumba and Mumbo are back too, but Mumba seems to be doing the transformations this time, turning you into anything from a washing machine to a T-Rex. Bit of a weird mix there. Mumbo's still doing his magic, bringing statues to life and messing with ice and rainbows. Classic Mumbo really. Ekle. There are a few screenshots dotted around, showing off bits of gameplay. One's got a spiky pufferfish, looking as unfriendly as you'd expect. Another shows Banjo as a dinosaur thanks to Mumba, probably stomping about somewhere prehistoric. There's a mention of someone linked to the BK link, whatever that is. Magazine seems a bit vague on that. Another screenshot talks about seeing for miles in Banjo-Tooie, but says it gets a bit jerky when there's loads on screen, typical N64 pushing itself to the limits. And finally, one about limited air in fiery sections when you're a snowball, sounds like classic Rare platforming challenges. Overall, it's building up the hype for Banjo-Tooie, showing us what to expect from the new characters and gameplay mechanics. This page of N64 Magazine is taking a look at Banjo-Tooie, and what new tricks Banjo and Kazooie have up their sleeves. They're calling it Animal Magic, which is a bit cheesy, even for them. First up is the Grip Grab, which basically lets you hang off ledges, Pretty standard platforming stuff really, but essential for getting to all those secret areas I suppose. Then there's the bill drill, which is Kazooie hammering away with her beak like a pneumatic drill, apparently useful for getting gold coins. In Jolly Roger's Lagoon sounds like a bit of a gimmick to be honest. Claw Clamber lets Kazooie climb vertical surfaces, and egg aiming is like Donkey Kong 64, letting you fire eggs in first person, with new egg types like ice and fire, and even clockwork birds that explode. Sounds like they're really piling on the moves this time around, almost too many maybe. B. The level link section is about secret tunnels acting as shortcuts, showing how you can get between different levels. They're giving an example in Pterodactyl Land, with shivering cavemen who want food, leading you through tunnels to Witchy World to grab burgers and fries, and then back again to feed the cavemen. A bit of a fetch quest then. Apparently you need to find a Super Globo in Witchy World to access a tunnel to Hailfire Peaks. Sounds like a bit of a faff to be honest, but if it cuts down on backtracking then fair enough. Finally, there's a bit about Sabreman in Hailfire Peaks. Apparently there's a frozen bloke in a block of ice who turns out to be Sabreman, from those old ZX Spectrum games like Sabre Wolf. That's a deep cut, even for Rare, proper retro throwback. They're even saying he wonders about riding a dolphin in the future, hinting maybe at Killer Instinct 3 on the GameCube. Bit of a stretch that, but you never know with Rare. They always were full of surprises. This page covers the splits in Banjo-Tooie. It's all about how for the first time Banjo and Kazooie can go off on their own, but cooperation is still key, like in the puzzle they show. You've got to find the Banjo and Kazooie pads, split them up, and then use them separately to hit switches and open doors. They mention Kazooie can glide on her own because she's lighter, which is handy. And then Banjo can be shoved in his sack to protect him from lava or sewage. Charming. Then there's a bit on multiplayer. They're calling Banjo-Tooie's multiplayer comprehensive, which is probably a bit of an understatement, there's loads of it. Apparently every minigame from the solo game is available for up to 4 players, and there are about a dozen different games. They mention first-person bits like underground mine shafts, and Mayan kickball, and then these GoldenEye-style deathmatches. They reckon these deathmatches are quite well thought out, with one-hit kills and team play. They even compare it to GoldenEye and Mario Party multiplayer, saying it's not groundbreaking but still welcome. Finally, there's a section on more minigames, highlighting Hoop Hurry, First Person, Potto Gold, and Trash Can Germs. They say these pop up more often than in the first Banjo-Kazooie, and they are tremendous fun. Right then. And then there's a little bit about postmodern platforming, where they are saying Banjo-Tooie is self-aware and full of in-jokes, like they keep reminding you it's just a game and Rare logos are everywhere. They think Kazooie treats every boss and puzzle with a cynical see-it-all-before attitude. Refreshing or unnerving, they say. Bit much if you ask me, it's just a platformer, at the end of the day. This page is all about Banjo-Tooie, and it seems they are properly impressed by it. Right at the top, it's talking about the bosses in the game. They are saying Banjo-Kazooie was a bit light on bosses, but Tooie is making up for it with loads of angry oversized enemies, including inflatable dinosaurs and those evil robotic Mumbo twins. Apparently beating them gets you a jiggy, but interestingly you don't actually have to beat all of them to complete the game. Though they mention the final boss fight with Gruntilda is unavoidable, and now she's doing a quiz show type thing, which sounds a bit odd, doesn't it? They're comparing Gruntilda to Anne Robinson from The Weakest Link, which is a bit of a stretch, but I see what they mean with the stern witch vibe. There's a section called Visuals that is raving about how good the game looks, saying every map is like a matchbox because they are so packed with detail. They're calling it Mario-style platforming, but bigger. They mention all sorts of gameplay bits, like sneaking past snakes, shooting statues in first person. Controlling a massive gold statue sounds typically bonkers Rare stuff, doesn't it? They even mention football, which is probably American football, mind you. It's all about variety, they reckon. They're also saying the animations on the enemies are brilliant even if there aren't loads of them, which is a fair point. If Rare are behind it, they always nail the animation. There are screenshots dotted about too, showing off different bits of the game. One is of Logo the toilet. Remember him from the first game? He's back, and still making you clean his up-end apparently. Another one is of that prospector fella from Glitter Gulch Mine who is a bit too attached to his rat apparently. And of course Mumbo is in every level, hiding away, ready to be found so he can work his magic on stuff. There's a picture of him controlling a big statue, must be one of his transformations. All in all, it sounds like Banjo-Tooie is living up to the hype, as you'd expect from Rare back then. This page is a proper deep dive into Banjo-Tooie. Can you believe it's already being investigated like some kind of major incident? This is from N64 Magazine, and they are calling it an N64 Special Investigation, which is a bit dramatic for a bear and bird platformer, isn't it? Still, gotta love the enthusiasm. Warranty. There's a massive picture of Banjo and Kazooie looking a bit manic, right in the middle, looming over everything. They've got screenshots sprinkled around, showing off different bits of the game. One of them looks like a boss fight with a dragon in the water, seems Gruntilda's back to her old tricks, and apparently brought a twin brother along for the ride, cheeky cow. Another shows Mumbo Jumbo doing his shaman thing, looking like he's about to cause some mischief. And there's a shot of those bouncy Banjo-Kazooie carts. They were a bit of a laugh in the first game, wonder what they're for this time. They're banging on about the lifespan, reckon it's around 50 hours, packed into the cart, which is a fair old chunk of time for a game back then. They mention all the different maps, going from Glitter Gulch Mine to Cloud Cuckle, and classic rare level names, aren't they? Sounds like they've gone all out on the variety again. Apparently no fogging or pop-up either. Impressive stuff for the N64. And they're raving about the controls and animations being smooth and funny, which you'd expect from Rare. They always nailed that. Oh, and it mentions Heggy the hen will hatch mystery eggs for cheats. Always loved a good cheat back in the day. Made you feel like you were getting away with something. And there's a bit about a train in Glitter Gulch Mine. Reckon that'll be important for some puzzles then. Sounds like they're really packing this game with stuff, eh? Makes you want to dust off the old N64 and have a go, doesn't it? April can't come quick enough for this one. This page of Planet Game Boy is dominated by Pokemon Gold and Silver. They're back, it proclaims, and yeah, they really were. It was massive back then, everyone was buzzing for these. Looks like a review is coming up. They've got a load of Pokemon characters plastered all over it. Pikachu, Clefairy, Marill, that Firebird who. It also mentions reviews for Mario Tennis on page 33, classic Japanese import, RPG tennis action, and 4 new characters for the N64 version. Well, Mario Tennis was always a laugh, wasn't it? Good multiplayer fun. And then there's Backgammon on page 32, with the question, it's the world's oldest board game, but can Backgammon cut it on the Game Boy? Bit random to put that alongside Pokemon, isn't it? There's also a plus section listing Game Boy Gallery, freak out with the world's ugliest photo album, top tips for the latest GB titles, and sneaky cheats for Pokemon trading card game. So lots of Game Boy goodness crammed in here for issue 26, dated February 2001. And a competition to win! Send us your top tips and win an action replay online! Pooh! Classic magazine fodder. This page is from a gaming magazine, Planet Game Boy, and it's issue 26 from February 2001. Right at the top it's talking about how it's prime Game Boy shopping season, Christmas time again for Pokemon, and they reckon loads more units of the little handheld have been shipped. They're saying it's been a good year for the Game Boy quality-wise, mentioning titles like Cannon Fodder, Driver, Metal Gear Solid and Pokemon Pinball. They're also talking about Pokemon Gold and Silver, saying they might be the last of Nintendo's own black and white Game Boy games before the Game Boy Advance comes out. Bit of a mention about PlayStation 2 launching and Sony not getting enough consoles to the UK, similar situation may be brewing for the Game Boy Advance. Then there's an article called Tex Hex Lifted, all about Tyrannosaurus Tex on the Game Boy Color. Remember that one? It was meant to be this groundbreaking 3D shoot-'em-up. Apparently they previewed it ages ago in September 1999 and then it just vanished. But now it's back, finally. They say it's pretty much finished and ready to go. They call it Doom style, which was a big deal back then for a handheld. Apparently you can move smoothly and quickly, and the controls are simple, using the D-pad to strafe left and right. It's got 28 levels, mazes, puzzles and dinosaurs, to shoot with 6 different weapons. Plus there's a 2-player deathmatch mode. Sounds alright for a Game Boy Color game, doesn't it? Mazy. Underneath that there's an article called Swan Song, about the Wonder Swan Color. Apparently, it was the hottest gadget in Tokyo at the time. It's Bandai's new color handheld, and it was doing well in Japan. They mentioned Final Fantasy being bundled with it helped sales, and they've sold over 600,000 already. They say it's less than Game Boy Color sells, but still impressive. Bandai's plan is to sell rewritable carts and make downloadable games, a bit like Nintendo's system for Game Boy and SNES. It can also connect to a robotic insect called the Wonderborg, which sounds a bit mad, doesn't it? They reckon it might use smart media cards or memory sticks, or even SD cards like the GameCube, which was quite forward-thinking for the time. This page then is Planet Game Boy news right at the start of the mag. First up we've got a piece called Dirty Dozen. Seems like some American parents group, the Lion and Lamb Project, are having a moan about violent Game Boy games. They've got a list called Dirty Dozen of games they reckon are a bit much for kids. They mention Turok 3 and Metal Gear Solid, which, okay, fair enough, they're a bit shooty. They also bizarrely chuck in Bionic Commando and Mortal Kombat 4, which are a bit punchy I suppose, and even Super Smash Bros, which is a bit of a cartoon scrap at best. Seems a bit over the top to call them all the dirty dozen most violent games. There's a screenshot of Bionic Commando there, looks like the Game Boy Color version, and another shot of Metal Gear Solid on the Game Boy, sneaking around a snake, classic stuff. The article mentions something about sniper modes being bad, but platform action being alright. Bit of a weird distinction, to be honest. Then underneath that we've got Frankenstein's handheld. This is a bit of a laugh. Apparently some bloke called Benjamin J. Heckendorn has built his own portable Atari 2600. Mad, isn't it? Calls it the VCSP Portable. Picture of it there, looks like a proper chunky bit of kit, using actual Atari cartridges sticking out the top. The article says it actually works, which is impressive, I guess, for a bit of a homebrew project. It's a bit ironic really, with the Game Boy Color and WonderSwan Color doing alright at the time, and they're talking about building a portable Atari from the 80s. Still, fair play to him, bit of retro fun. They even put a little comment bubble saying, "Wow! If only somebody had thought of this back in 1980. Yeah, no kidding. If you're that way inclined, they say to check out classicgaming.com/VCSP for more info. This page is a review for Pokemon Gold and Silver on the Game Boy. Right at the top, it lays out its ultimate buying guide scoring system, from 5 stars for a must-have, to 1 star, which is basically saying avoid like the plague. Looks like they're getting into the new features of Gold and Silver, calling it brand new gear. They're banging on about the Poké Gear, which is fair enough. It was a big deal at the time. Having a map and phone in your pocket on the Game Boy felt quite advanced back then, even if it was just calling up Professor Elm for the 10th time. The review talks about monsters, obviously it's Pokemon. Apparently the Pokédex is nicer to look at and gives you even more info on your Pocket Monster's abilities, which is always welcome when you're trying to figure out what's what. There's also a filing option so you can actually sort your Pokemon lists, which sounds incredibly useful for anyone who got into breeding and collecting. Then there's a bit on bonus games. They're mentioning puzzles, mini-games and subquests. Always good to have a bit more to do than just catching them all, eh? One of the screenshots shows a slot machine, which they called the Game Corner. That was always a bit of a time sink. Another screenshot is about a mystery egg, and another one is in Goldenrod City. Looks like they're trying to sell you on all the new stuff in Gold and Silver, which they probably didn't need to, everyone was going mad for it anyway. This page is a review of Pokemon Silver for the Game Boy. Right then, Pokemon Silver, back in 2001. It's called an import review, which tells you this was before it properly came out in the UK, probably still Japan only at this point. The review focuses on the quest and the egg hatching feature. It mentions you've still got the 8 gym leaders to beat. Nothing new there for a Pokemon game. Apparently the first few gyms are a doddle, but it gets harder later on. They even suggest using an unknown in the early gyms for an easy win. Cheeky. They've highlighted the cute monsters are popular. No surprises there. There's a bit called Mother Nurture about Pokemon eggs. Apparently you just keep the egg warm in your pocket and it'll hatch. They say you can't tell what Pokemon will hatch, but it'll be cute. On the page, they've got an egg hatching into a Togepi, which they call the best of the new batch of monsters, though they also say it's a bit rubbish in battle. They've even got a little battle scene where Togepi uses Charm and doesn't do much damage to a Magnemite. Togepi, remember everyone loved Togepi because it was cute, not because it was strong. They also point out that having an egg in your party means you can only carry 5 proper Pokemon. Gesture. There are screenshots showing battles with a Pinsir and a Bayleaf, and a bloke called Pokefan Brandon who wants to battle. It mentions the game is user-friendly, and that things like cutting down trees are automatic now. Small mercies, eh? And the trading system is improved. They're saying the game is huge, and anyone who loved Red and Blue will be amazed. Which was probably true at the time. They've given it a 5-star rating at the end, so it's a decent score. It's all about the new Pokemon, and features really, trying to tempt you into getting the import version before it comes out here. This page features a couple of reviews for the Game Boy Color, both scoring quite low on the excitement scale if you ask me. First up, it's backgammon. Right, backgammon on the Game Boy Color. They're saying it's been around for ages, ancient Greeks and all that. It seems like a pretty straightforward version. You play tournament mode, face different opponents, get passwords to save. Apparently it's decent enough if you're into backgammon, but the reviewer does moan about slow computer turns and annoying pop-up messages. They gave it a 4 out of 5, which seems generous for a digital version of a board game, doesn't it? Boo. Then we've got Tom and Jerry in Mouse Attacks, another 2D platformer. Surprise, surprise. Warner Bros. License this time. Sounds a bit naff, to be honest. You're collecting cakes and musical notes, doing minigames, sliding puzzles. They say it starts off easy but gets proper frustrating later on, especially with the bosses. Apparently if you mess up you're replaying the whole level. Ouch. They reckon it looks cute but is a bit rubbish and slapped it with a 2 out of 5. Sounds like one to avoid unless you're really desperate and your Auntie Maud got you some Christmas money, burning a hole in your pocket. This page is a review for Mario Tennis on the Game Boy Color, and blimey, they were raving about it, weren't they? Monster, they called it, quite a statement. They reckon it's a cracking handheld version of the N64 classic, Mario Tennis, and they're comparing it to SNES Super Tennis and Mario Golf, saying it's in the same league. They talk about how it's got this RPG element, where you can upgrade your racket and shoes, and gain experience points, which is a bit different for a tennis game. In it seems you can wander around this clubhouse area, face off against different characters, and even do mini-games, like this Piranha Challenge. Apparently it's proper tricky. They mention you can link it up with the N64 version using the transfer pack, which unlocks new characters and lets you earn experience points on the Game Boy to use on the N64. Clever stuff at the time. They give it a full 5 stars, reckon it's top notch, and Nintendo are geniuses. Fair enough, it was a decent game back then, I suppose. Hey yay. There are screenshots dotted around as well, showing the 3D sections, doubles matches, and this clubhouse area they are talking about. Looks alright for a Game Boy Color game. Pretty colourful and clear. They're even pointing out some character definition in the sprites, getting all technical. Yeah, Mario Tennis on the Game Boy Color, a solid handheld title back in the day. This page is a right blast from the past, isn't it? It's a guide section from, I reckon, a gaming mag, probably for the Game Boy, judging by the GB Action Replays bit. Right at the top, there's Professor Oak, with an Ask OK section. Someone's writing in about getting stuck in the executive room in Team Rocket HQ in Pokemon Silver. Oak, bless him, is giving advice about Persian statues, computers, and having to beat specific rockets for passwords. Proper old-school puzzle-solving stuff that was gallon. Then there's another question about importing Pokemon Gold from America. Oak's helpfully explaining which Pokemon are in each version Gold and Silver. Mentioning Gold has Mankey, Primeape, Growlithe, Arcanine, Spinarak, Ariados, Gligar, Teddiursa, Ursaring, and Mantine, and Silver has Vulpix, Ninetales, Meowth, Persian, Ledybur, Ledian, Delibird, Skarmory, Fanpai, and Donphan. You had to trade between the versions to get them all, the usual trick. Celebi was a pain to get back then, wasn't it? He also lists a load of Pokemon you could get, using the time capsule like Bulbasaur, Ivysaur, Venusaur, Charmander, Charmeleon, Charizard, and all those Gen 1 classics, including the legendary birds and Mewtwo and Mew. They really crammed them in, didn't they? Payenik. There are some little screenshots from the Pokemon trading card game for Game Boy. Looks like they're showing off some card battles, Seeking and Matchup, and Staryu. Classic Game Boy graphics. Simple but addictive. No. Down at the bottom there's the GB Action Replay code section for Tomb Raider. Always handy, those cheat codes. Infinite health, infinite oxygen, rapid bullets, heavy bullets, the usual suspects. Then there's stuff like large and small health packs, door keys, panel pieces, dynamites. All the bits you'd want to cheat your way to getting in Tomb Raider. They even have codes for Snake Key, colored handles, red and blue diamonds, gold bars, iris, snake eye, nightmare stone, orb, and staff segments. Blimey, pretty much everything you could want in Tomb Raider cheated into your game. Action Replay, those were the days for getting past those tricky bits, or just messing about. This page showcases the Game Boy Gallery, remember that? Back then in 01 they were always looking for your freaks, as they called them, using the Game Boy camera. It was a bit of a laugh, seeing what people came up with using that blocky little camera. This month's winner is from some Norwegian bloke, Ruben Larsen, who's apparently good at making grim images even grimmer. Happy New Year to him. There are loads of reader submissions here. Andrew Highland from Accrington's got a particularly cheerful looking photo, grim indeed, just as he says. Someone else, David Devar from Liverpool, is asking if you could deny his food, whatever that means. Looks like a slightly dodgy kebab maybe. Then there's Griffin from Perth, Australia, doing an It's Same Griffin thing, which is probably supposed to be Mario related. Matthew Ackland from Spalding is likened to Mother Brain, which is a deep-cut Metroid reference for anyone who remembers that SNES classic. Italy's Laurie Alessandro has Happy Times with his bunny. Make of that what you will. Stephen Whaler from County Antrim is asking, keep it real, Stephen, or not, underneath a suitably surreal picture. Mark Kent from Pinner supposedly went 110% insane, which is a bit dramatic, but there you go. Neil Emmett from Norwich has done a Warhol tribute with his cat, calling it Morrison artistic license, I suppose. Elwyn, bless him, is clearly in love with his teacher, Mrs. Coleman. Kevin Seeney from Suffolk is labelled master artist for his crazy teeth and crazy eyes, so they weren't holding back on the compliments. Carl Everett from Kent and Scott Else's dad are both featured too, and then there's Wales James Beatty with a photo of a teddy, pondering about a Green Valley deep stuff. Daniel McFarlane from Omar has got some chat-up lines that are apparently persuasive, And Will Havercroft from Bristol has some wise words about being freaky. So yeah, the Game Boy Gallery, always a mixed bag of oddness and very low resolution photos. Joytech were apparently giving away an action pack too if you sent in your snaps. Good times, if a bit blurry and bizarre. This page showcases the latest N64 game reviews from N64 Arena magazine, looks like issue 51. Right at the top we've got Tigger's Honey Hunt. Ah yes, Winnie the Pooh on the N64, published by Ubisoft. It asks, is Tigger's a wonderful thing? Well, for the younger kids I suppose it was alright back then. A bit simple, but harmless fun. Next up is Rugrats in Paris, another cartoon license game. We grab an eyeful of another cartoony cart, they say. Rugrats again for the younger audience. Always a bit hit and miss these cartoon tie-ins. Ruksari. Then we have Import Arena. Don't forget to visit the Import Arena, with the American and Japanese flags. This section highlights games being played in America and Japan, probably before they hit the UK. Good to keep an eye on what was coming over from those territories. Sin and Punishment is mentioned, described as spectacular shooting. That's 1 part Lilat Wars, 1 part Jet Force Gemini. That's quite a claim. Sin and Punishment. Developed by Treasure. That was a bit of a cult classic and import favourite at the time, wasn't it? Very intense shooter. Spider-Man is featured, with Peter Parker teaches Superman a thing or two. Seems like they are comparing Spider-Man to Superman 64, which, let's be honest, wasn't a very high bar to clear. Spider-Man on the N64 was alright, a bit clunky maybe, but you could swing around New York, which was the main draw. Roy. Finally we have NFL Blitz 2001. 18, 51, 45, or some other score. NFL Blitz, that was always a laugh with mates. Over-the-top American football. Massive hits, late tackles, bit of a button basher but good fun in multiplayer. And lastly, Scooby-Doo. Down a Scooby snack and go bust some crimes. Another cartoon game for the younger crowd, Scooby-Doo. Probably a bit of a mystery-solving platformer type thing. Always lots of these licenses on the N64, aimed at kids. So overall, a typical N64 magazine page from back in the day, covering a range of games from kids' titles to slightly more hardcore stuff, and a look at imports. This page delves into how N64 Magazine actually reviews games, breaking down their process which they call viewed, rated, and completed. They start with essential information, which is like a quick spec sheet for each game. For Metroid 64 in this example, it lists things like the developer, cart size, player numbers, and peripheral compatibility, along with release dates for different regions, and the cost. It's a handy info burst I suppose, especially back in the day when you wanted to know if you needed a controller pack or rumble pack for a game. Then there's the if you're in a hurry section, which boils down to pluses and minuses and if you like this recommendations. Pluses and minuses are those quick bullet points highlighting good and bad aspects, and the if you like this box suggests similar games. In this case, if you liked GoldenEye, they reckon you might like Turok 2 or Quake 2. Fair enough comparisons for the time. The page then gets into the nitty-gritty of scoring. They've got categories: visuals, sounds, mastery, lifespan and verdict. Visuals and sounds are pretty self-explanatory. Mastery is about how well the game uses the N64's hardware, and lifespan is how long it'll keep you engaged. Verdict is the overall judgment, and all these combine into a final percentage score. They explain their percentage score brackets. 85% and above is Star Game Badge territory, only for truly exceptional games. 84% down to 70% is still considered fantastic, just not quite perfect. 69% to 50% is your average game, playable but nothing special. 49% to 20% is getting into dodgy territory, games that are lazily programmed or rushed. And anything 19% to 0% is the disaster zone, games they've slated. They've even got a little visual guide with coloured circles from yellow for top marks down to grey for the bottom. Finally, there's Team 64, showing off the reviewers themselves. Andrea Ball picked Sin and Punishment, Judd Webb went with Spider-Man, Mark Green also chose Sin and Punishment, Dark Mark opted for Rugrats in Paris, Geraint Evans picked Honey Hunt, Paul Edwards went for Spider-Man, Alan Madrell chose Spider-Man 2, Steve Jalim, again Sin and Punishment, and lastly Whooper plumped for Scooby-Doo. Seems like Sin and Punishment and Spider-Man were the hot tickets that month, eh? Bit of a varied bunch of games there for Game of the Month choices by the team, from Japanese shooters to kids' cartoon tie-ins, typical N64 range really. This page is an N64 magazine review for Tigger's Honey Hunt. It's fair to say, they aren't pulling any punches. The main headline calls it, another 2D Disney platformer disguised in poo clothing, which already sets the tone, doesn't it? The review starts by saying it's 2001, and we should be past simple games like this. They describe it as aimed at gullible, baldy apes, who are happy to replay the same old stuff. Bit harsh. They reckon the developers have managed to suck all the fun out of it, and that there's absolutely nothing to get your juices going. There's an info burst box on the left which gives the basic details. Ubisoft developed it. It's 128 megabit, single player only. Controller pack and rumble pack are a no-go. Password save also not there, but cartridge save is in, thankfully. It was out now in the UK and US, and TBA for Japan, and costing a hefty £40. Visually, the reviewer says the backgrounds are dull and unimpressive, with very little detail, like old books with washed-out colours. Gameplay-wise, they say it's just collecting honey for Pooh's party. They compare it to Donald Duck, Quack Attack, saying that at least had bells and whistles, while Honey Hunt has absolutely nothing. Side quests just drive you to insanity, forcing you through utterly bland landscapes. Graphically, Disney platformers are usually alright, but even the visuals can't save this one. They even say if Quack Attack was a sugary treat, then Honey Hunt is like a diluted lemon drink. Ouch. Around the screenshots, there are little speech bubbles with comments, like, shoddy game, no voiceover, and how rare enemies are. There's even a comment about map screens being nicely presented, but the game itself isn't consistent. Sounds like a bit of a stinker, really. Probably best avoided, even for kids back then. This page is a right savaging of Tigger's Honey Hunt. Blimey, they've gone straight in with Pooh stinks in massive letters, so you know it's not going to be a glowing review. Apparently, it's packed with the worst, most banal minigames in the history of gaming. Bit strong, but alright. Rabbit Says is called a dull Simon Says ripoff, and Pooh Sticks is slated for having all the fun sucked out of it. Ouch. They've got these pluses and minuses boxes. Pluses are good character animation and nice intro screens, which is hardly setting the world on fire, is it? The minuses list is longer and far more brutal. Dull, so easy it hurts, empty levels, painful voice acting, and unoriginal. They're not holding back, are they? There's a photo folly bit about collecting photos in the game, which they describe as an added incentive, with sarcasm dripping off the page, calling it whoopee. Under lifespan, they say the honey collecting alone is enough to make you do something unpleasant on your shirt, basically saying it's tedious and short. They reckon the game's 9 stages are sparsely furnished and you can count the enemies on one hand. No voice acting in cutscenes either, apparently, making it feel unfinished. Visually it gets a 7, sounds a 6, mastery a 4, and lifespan a 4. The verdict is, another hurried Disney-based title, rushed out for those who don't know any better. The final score is a measly 36%. Right at the end they suggest, if you like this, and recommend Donald Duck, Quack Attack on the N64, giving it a much better score of 69%, calling it beautiful and well executed, and perfect for little uns without being complete pap. So yeah, Tigger's Honey Hunt sounds like a proper stinker then. Best avoided. This page is a review for Rugrats in Paris, the movie on the N64. It seems like a fairly standard kids licensed game affair, nothing too groundbreaking. They've given it a score of 67%, which is, you know, alright for a Rugrats game. Diggy. The review is titled, Babbling Baba Land of Onions, which is a bit of a weird headline. In it, they mention that it's another kids' DV license tie-in, and they were a bit worried at first, but surprisingly it's not terrible. It's got a load of minigames, based around the Rugrats going to Paris, which sounds about right. Terrible. In the info burst section, it's from THQ, 96 megabit cart, up to 4 players, and uses 1 page of controller pack memory. It was out now in the US, due in March in the UK, and TBA for Japan. Cost about £40, standard price back then. The pluses and minuses bit is pretty typical. Pluses are cute as kittens, simple enough for tots, and quite pretty. Minuses are not enough minigames, really is only for preteens, and no true multiplayer. So yeah, kids game. If you like this section suggests Rugrats Treasure Hunt, another THQ Rugrats game on the N64, and they say it was bad. Charming. The verdict T section says, Mario Party with a third-person twist and noticeably fewer games. It'll provide a few hours of top entertainment for your 8-year-old sibling. So basically, it's a rental at best, probably just for the really young ones obsessed with Rugrats. Poor. There are screenshots with captions like, that's Kimmy on the left, but it doesn't make any difference who you play as. Ah. That'll be Reptar looming in the distance then. Very good. That's a red and then, most are better hidden than this. Bowling's a top smash with the kids, is it? Whack that one. Whack it now. We like this bit. The bumper cars are good, but what no multiplayer mode? And Chucky Chan. Also pretty good, but only the young will play this again. They seem to be having a bit of fun with it, but not exactly raving about it. Overall, sounds like a very average kids minigame collection. Perfectly serviceable to keep the young'uns quiet for a bit, but nothing to write home about. Definitely not one for the seasoned gamer, like ourselves back then. This page is from the Import Arena section, and it's all about Sin and Punishment on the N64. Apparently this section covers games only out in Japan or America, which makes sense given the big Japanese and American flags waving at the top. It mentions that N64 is fully independent Nintendo, so they can review these import titles straight away, and they'll give an updated review when they eventually get released over here if they do. TT. The main game being showcased is Sin and Punishment, billed as, "This Sin's original and deadly." They've got a few screenshots dotted around with little captions offering gameplay advice, things like aiming tips, blowing up a battleship with lasers, tough battles on a train, and dealing with giant snake bosses sounds like a right old bullet hell shooter then. There's an info burst table breaking down the game's details. It's from Nintendo and Treasure, a 256 megabit cartridge, 1 or 2 players, uses controller packs for saves but no password saves, which is a bit of a pain if you ask me. Doesn't need the expansion pack or transfer pack but does use the rumble pack, thank goodness. The UK release date is TBA at the time, and the import cost is around £43, which is a fair whack for an import. There's a box highlighting N64 Passport compatible, with a code for those converter cartridges, so you can play it on your UK machine assuming you've got one of those adapters of course. The text talks about Nintendo always having surprises up their sleeve, and how Sin and Punishment was a bit of a shock at Space World. Apparently, everyone expected another platformer or kart racer from Nintendo, but instead, it was this shoot-'em-up. It mentions that the N64 was a bit starved of this type of game since Lilac Wars, which is Star Fox 64 to us Brits, and that arrived over 3 years prior. The article mentions Treasure developing it, who are known as a quiet development team but responsible for some great games in the past. Apparently Treasure are traditionally 2D developers, and for Sin and Punishment they've enlisted NTSC, who worked on Ridge Racer, to help them with the 3D side of things. It finishes by wondering if they can pull it off, and to find out more over the page, so a bit of intrigue there, making you want to turn the page to see what they think. The next page here is all about Sin and Punishment, part of the Import Arena section. They're calling it They Get Around, and it's breaking down the different types of gameplay you'll experience. Apparently there are 4 main styles: forward, which is your typical fixed speed run into the screen affair; sideways, which sounds like your standard side-scrolling bits; all around, which is on flying platforms doing loop-the-loops. Sounds a bit mad to be honest. Then there's Frozen, which is about boss fights with fancy camera angles, apparently a button masher at the end of level 4. They've got a few little tips dotted around too. Apparently the red bonus targets always appear at the hardest bits, typical isn't it? They mention the colours are drab but the explosions are decent. There's a funny bit about needing 15 fingers to play properly, clearly exaggerating the difficulty. And a warning if you don't like spiders, apparently S&P isn't for you, good to know. Oh, and you can shoot cats in this game, apparently, and they're joking about the RSPCA not existing in 2007, bit of a weird future reference for a 2001 magazine. They also mention the camera swinging around a lot to keep you on target and that there are loads of insect-like enemies, and that one section is just really difficult, as if we needed telling. Down at the bottom they've got a section called Fake Fights, about the training level. They're saying Sin and Punishment has its own training level set in a purple holosuite. Apparently it's got about 5 minutes of shooting and dodging, ending with a laser show. Oddly they've shoehorned in some of the monsters from the original Space Invaders arcade machine, for some reason. They reckon you can easily spend ages in this training mode trying to beat your high score. Seems a bit much for a training level, but each to their own. This page of N64 Magazine from back in the day is taking a look at Sin and Punishment, which was a bit of an import gem for the N64. It's titled Sea of Dreams, and it's a guide to one of the levels, showing you how to tackle it in 8 steps with screenshots. They're banging on about Saki, the main character, and how mental this level is. Step 1 is about diving seawards while fighter planes are spitting bullets at you. Then you're facing battleships, swatting missiles back with your sword. Classic Treasure, that is. It goes on about laser streams from a helicopter you need to leap over. Then insect-like ruffians attacking, and being upside down facing turrets. Seems like typical over-the-top action from them. The reviewer reckons it's brutally hard, so hard they almost swore at their N64, saying treasure games often are. Remember Bangai-O? They compare it to Jet Force Gemini in terms of gameplay, but visually, they say it's not as colorful as Lilac Wars but still visually impressive, even Shig's wondering how they pulled it off. They are really hyping up the screen being chaotic with bullets and explosions. A real sensory overload. They mention using the lock-on sight and deflecting projectiles with your sword, which is key to mastering it, and say every boss needs a different skill to beat. Sounds about right for a proper challenge. Didn't have many games like this on the N64, especially not officially released here at the time. This page is all about a Japanese import game called Sin and Punishment, and it's getting a massive BIGITUP headline, so it must be something special. Right from the get-go they're saying it's anime style with massive bosses, which is classic Japanese gaming really. Or, they're running through some of the bosses like Armed Volunteers Aircraft, which sounds like a mouthful, and this worm boss before it. Then there's Kachua, who sounds like a bit of a fiery pain. Birth Model, which is a stream of rocks charmingly named, and Spider Cedar Core, a stomach-like thing in a bin. It's all very imaginative, I'll give them that. The pluses and minuses section is pretty standard. Relentless pace, surprisingly varied, supremely challenging, and no slowdown. All sounds good for a shooter. But then on the minus side, questionable longevity, and only fun with one. So basically, it's a blast but might not last forever, and is a single-player affair. Fair enough. They're saying if you like Lilac Wars you'll like this, which is high praise indeed. Lilac Wars was brilliant. Accessibility-wise it's all in English, apart from the main menu, which is handy for us Brits importing it. Visually it's supposed to be gorgeous, which you'd hope for. Sounds are competent, but the shooting sounds are a bit weedy apparently. Bit of a letdown there. Mastery gets a big thumbs up for action and speed, and lifespan is limited, but the hard mode is tough. The verdict is glowing, calling it a simply stunning shoot-'em-up, showing the N64 at full steam, and essential if you've got the right kind of N64 to play imports on. And it gets a whopping 89% and a Star Game Award. So yeah, they're clearly loving this one. Looks like one of those intense Japanese shooters. Might have to track down a copy if you were into that sort of thing back then. This page in N64 Magazine, issue 51, takes a look at the Spider-Man game on the N64. It seems they'd already given it a bit of a looking back in issue 48. They've got some screenshots showing off the game, commenting on things like Spider-Man's black and white suit being resistant to damage, swinging around skyscrapers, and even Mrs. Parker, bless her, getting a mention in the character bios. There's a bit of a chuckle about the expansion pack, suggesting it barely makes a difference to the graphics. A bit like Tony Hawk's skateboarding, they reckon Activision might as well have skipped it to save a few quid for those of us without the extra RAM. In the info burst box, we're getting the nitty-gritty details. 128 megabit cart size, single player only, uses 4 pages on the controller pack, no cartridge or password saves, which is a bit of a pain, but it does support the expansion pack and rumble pack, though no transfer pack support. It's out now in the US, due in March here, and they reckon it's about $50, or roughly 35 quid. The visuals section is saying the game is trying to stick close to the comic book style, which is good to hear. They're saying Stan Lee had a hand in things, and they've got actors from the Spider-Man Unlimited cartoon involved. They were worried about it going from animation to stills, but it sounds like they're happy with how it's turned out. They mention classic characters like Venom and Doc Ock being in there. Web slinging around the city sounds like the main draw, and they're pleased with the action, saying it was designed for comics in the first place. Apparently Spidey's cracking jokes throughout, and there's a load of web-based special moves. They do moan a bit about the camera when you're climbing upside down and firing webs, and they're having a dig at the developers' Edge of Reality for not using the analog stick, just like in Tony Hawk's, which seems a bit daft in this day and age. It also mentions it works on UK consoles with a converter cartridge, just the V3 version. This page of the magazine is all about the Spider-Man game on the N64 Arena. Right then, they're calling this section Strands of the Web, and it's showing off different types of levels in the game. First up, running, seems you're legging it from the old Bill in a helicopter. Mazing is about chasing Venom through sewers, sounds charming. Dodging is skyscraper climbing, whilst avoiding more helicopter gunship fire, joy of joys. And shocking is battling Rhino, looks like you're using pylons to zap him. Typical superhero stuff. They also mention a costume viewer. Apparently some suits give you extra powers, fancy that. Below that is one step, two step, looks like a mini walkthrough showing some sneaky stealth section. Climb into an air vent, bit of wall slinging, classic Spider-Man really. Then there's the pluses and minuses box. Pluses are, it's Spider-Man, versatile character, and great comic book feel. Hardly groundbreaking praise, is it? Minuses are a bit short, Camera and control problems and, analog control? Well, welcome to N64 Gaming, mate. If you like this section recommends Shadowman. Remember that one? Dark, moody, puzzle-based, also from a comic, apparently 93% in Acclaim magazine, whoever they are. Scores: time, visuals and sounds both get an 8, mastery and lifespan a 7. Verdict is 78% overall. Alan Madrell reckons it's highly enjoyable arachnid action, but control is a bit iffy. Watch out, Spider fans, he says. Right then, February 2001. Another month, another game review. This page is about NFL Blitz 2001 for the N64, in the Import Arena section. It's got a bit of a cheeky headline, man mangling with odd-shaped balls, typical lads mag humor really. The review is saying it's pretty much the same as the other Blitz games, fast-paced arcade American football, and reckons you'd need to be a bit of a dedicated importer and a fan of the sport to really get into it. They highlight the Noodle Play Editor, which sounds like a cool feature where you can draw your own plays, a bit different for the time. There's a bit about it being compatible with UK N64s with a passport adapter, which was always good to know back then with imports. The pluses and minuses box is pretty standard, saying good things like great multiplayer fun, excellent play editor, and officially licensed. The minuses are primitive animation, more of an update than an overhaul, and stop-starty. The reviewer, Alan Madrell, in the verdict at the bottom, calls it still the most out-and-out fun American footy game, and gives it a decent 78%. In the if you like this bit, it mentions NFL Blitz GT, noting it was an earlier version that actually got a UK release, unlike this import. So basically, it's Blitz as you know it, fast, over the top, but maybe not a massive leap forward from previous games. This page from the Import Arena section of the magazine is having a look at Scooby-Doo, classic creep capers on the N64. Sounds like it's not a winner, to be honest. They are saying the camera is all over the place, and the controls are a bit of a mess. Flipping between Resi style and Mario style sounds proper confusing. Gameplay-wise, it's just wandering around rooms picking up bits and bobs, very basic stuff. Rarely, they've got some screenshots dotted around, and they are taking the mickey out of the dodgy dialogue and cutscenes. The reviewer is laying on the sarcasm, with lines like, "Shouldn't that be too utter rubbish, it's properly cutting." There's an info burst box with the game details. THQ published it, it's a 96 meg cartridge, single player only, needs 3 pages on your controller pack. Apparently it was already out in America at the time, but still TBA, for us and Japan. The overall feeling is pretty negative. They reckon THQ have forgotten to put the game in, suggesting it's rushed and a bit pointless. Sounds like one to steer clear of then, best stick to watching the cartoons on telly instead. This page features a review of Scooby-Doo, classic creep capers for the N64. Right then, Scooby-Doo on the N64, who'd have thought it? The review is titled, "Doo!" Capers got released in big letters. There are sections in boxes like Raggy, RRRUN, Fool, Hurt, and Lure, which look like gameplay tips or descriptions. The reviewer, Mark Green, seems a bit underwhelmed, to be honest. He calls it a travesty of a game, and a cynical pocket money pilfering machine. Strong words. He mentions the controls are a bit clunky for catching food chucked out of the fridge in a minigame. He also says the visuals are primitive, and that it looks really bad, like they've lost their glasses. Ouch. The sounds get a better mention. Apparently there are authentic Scooby sound samples, but not enough of them. The review has a section called Pluses and Minuses, which sums it up. Pluses are authentic Scooby sound samples, but minuses are too few of them, exceedingly ropey presentation, hideous controls, and too much guesswork required. Doesn't sound great, does it? There's a "if you like this" box suggesting Resident Evil 2, saying it's the scare 'em up Scooby-Doo wants to be. Bit of a dig there, comparing a cartoon dog game to a survival horror classic. They've rated it out of 5 in categories like visuals, sounds, mastery and lifespan, and they're mostly low scores. 4 for visuals, which seems generous given what was said earlier, 5 for sounds, which is the highest. Mastery and lifespan both get a 2. Lifespan is described as 60 minutes worth of game, if you are desperate. The final verdict is a cartoony clone of Resident Evil 2 that's as tedious and badly put together as it is downright ugly. Scooby-Dooby don't. Brutal. The score is a measly 23%. Crikey, that's a proper stinker. There's also a bit about N64 passport compatible, which reminds you that back then we had to worry about import games and needing converters. Madness. Overall, it seems like they really didn't rate this Scooby-Doo game at all. This page is the cover for the Club 64 section, and it's screaming Perfect Dark as this month's big guide. Apparently it's packed with secrets and quirky bits that they're going to reveal, which sounds like typical magazine hype at the time. There are the usual sections, like the Club 64 mailbox on page 54, always good for a laugh at some of the daft questions readers would send in. Then there's a how-to guide for Mickey Speedway USA on page 64, bit of a basic kart racer really, nothing special. Another how-to for importing N64 games on page 68, which was a big deal back then if you wanted to play stuff before it came out here, or if it never did. Page 70 is for Tips Extra with Banjo-Kazooie codes, always handy for those collectathon games. Game On is on page 74, probably for fresh challenges in older games. I'm the Best is on page 76 for new scores in their leagues, which is a bit of competitive fun. Page 80 has the Millennium Club. Asking if you're worthy to join their exclusive club sounds a bit poncy if you ask me. Dr. Kit's Game Clinic is on page 83, the hanky for your gaming sneezes, whatever that means, probably some dodgy advice section. The directory is on page 84, every game reviewed and rated, so a quick guide to what was worth playing. And finally, back issues and subscriptions on page 94 if you're missing any and want to give them more money. At the bottom it says February 2001, N64 issue number 53. Right then, let's see what secrets they've dug up for Perfect Dark. The next page is the Club 64 mailbox. It's the letters page basically. Looks like some readers have sent in letters, and one of them has made a crossword puzzle for the magazine. The first letter is about a review of Zelda, Majora's Mask, where the magazine apparently misspelled Kotake and called a Dinolthor a Dynafol. Someone called Daniel Redshaw from Ashbourne is pointing out the mistakes. Ed, the editor, says, both actually. Seems like Mark's fault. Then there's a letter from Stuart Ashton in Brighton about Dr. Kitts, who in issue 49 called someone young Padawan in a reply letter. Stuart thought it was silly. Ed's reply is, very silly. And very scary. Kin Ed. Bit sarcastic there, maybe Dr. Kitts went a bit overboard with the Star Wars reference. Warrington Norcus. There's another correction point about issue 49's review of TWINE, saying Eurocomma mentioned, seems like another error. Then there's a letter from James Thomas in Southampton about the WWF No Mercy review in issue 49, where the reviewer said you can't put people through tables. James says you can if you have your opponent on the table and do a strong grapple. He says, blast Alan's stupid brain, bit harsh that. Ed says, blasted. Ed. Finally, there's a compare section where David Fortnam from Birmingham is writing in about polygon counts. He read in issue 47 about GameCube and polygon counts. And his mate's PlayStation 2 magazine says the PS2 does 75 million polygons. He's asking who to believe. Ed basically says don't look at the PlayStation 2's theoretical numbers, the GameCubes are based on actual in-game performance, and it should beat the PS2 hands down. A bit of console war stuff there as you'd expect. There's also a crossword puzzle called Hairy Ape, with clues like Nintendo's next-gen console and Mario's arch-nemesis. Looks like a bit of fun for the readers. They are giving away a prize for the first completed crossword too. A tasty prize, whatever that means, probably a badge, judging by the top of the page. The next page is the mailbag section, Club 64 mailbox. It's got a bunch of letters from readers. First up, someone's written in about a signed Game Boy cartridge, looks like Perfect Dark. They've managed to make out Grant Kirkhope's name on it, and they reckon it was expensive but worth it. Ed's replied and says it's definitely Will Overton's scribble, and mentions they miss him. Will was a regular artist for the mag, known for his distinctive style. Then there's a letter titled Spooky about Robotrek on the SNES. This reader is pointing out that the item capsules in the game look a lot like Voltorbs and Electrodes from Pokemon, and even explode if you don't grab them quick enough. They also mention that your robots are kept in capsules outside of battles. Robotrek, yeah, vaguely remember that one. Isometric RPG, not a massive hit but had its fans. Ed just says, spooky indeed. Next is Startling, talking about Majora's Mask and the masks in that game. This reader noticed that some of the masks look a bit like Mario, especially the face and hat. They're wondering if the Mask Maker character was designed with Mario in mind. Ed seems to agree, saying it would have been cool if you could wear it. Majora's Mask was still pretty fresh at this time, a darker Zelda game, and those masks were certainly memorable. After that, there's a letter about Nintendonitis. Someone's seen a news article about a kid in Scotland getting elbow pain, apparently from overusing a joystick, and they're calling it Nintendonitis. The reader doubts that using an N64 controller could cause elbow pain, and Ed jokes that if Nintendonitis ever hit the office, they'd be cream-crackered, meaning really exhausted or amused. Bit of a silly term really, Nintendonitis, but repetitive strain injuries were becoming a concern as people were gaming for longer stretches. Then there's a bucket, a funny one. This person was flicking through old issues and spotted something in issue 38 about a game called Mario and Wario on the SNES. They then noticed that in Pokemon Red or Blue, if you go to Saffron City and into a certain house, there's a girl playing a SNES game with Mario wearing a bucket on his head. It's a little Easter egg referencing Mario and Wario, which was a Japan-only puzzle game at the time. Ed calls it Injokari in Pokemon and says, "We like, a nice little spot for eagle-eyed gamers." Finally, there are a couple of game ideas submitted by readers under Dream On. First is Super Mario Olympics from Adam Russell, suggesting a Mario Olympics game with all the usual Mario characters like Mario, Luigi, Peach, Toad, Bowser, plus Goombas and Koopa Troopers. They're thinking of events suited to each character, like Donkey Kong at shot put and Shy Guy in the 100 meters sprint. Ed reckons it could have been great if it came out in time for the Sydney Olympics last year, but maybe we'll see something similar for the Athens Games in 2004. A Mario Olympics game, yeah, that sounds pretty much like Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games, which came later on. Ooh. The second idea is Galaxy Generation from Ian Dawson. This one's a bit more serious, about an environmentally aware game where you have to save creatures from global warming and nuclear waste on Mars after Earth self-destructs. You'd encounter a new race called Critons. Ed calls it a bit like an environmentally friendly Harvest Moon in space, and jokes it could be sponsored by Greenpeace. A bit ambitious and maybe a bit preachy for a game at the time, but environmental themes were starting to creep into everything. And that's the letters page, a good mix of retro and current stuff, and some creative game ideas from the readers. This page has got the usual letters section, where readers are having their say. Someone's complaining about bottles in Banjo-Kazooie, reckon they took it too far killing him off. Another one's slagging off the PlayStation 2, saying they should shove it back in the plane. Bit harsh, mate. There's praise for issue 49's intro page. Apparently it was very scary, whatever that means. Maybe they were sledging down a hill too fast or something. Someone's apologizing for their handwriting because of a broken thumb. Ouch. And someone else is loving the mag apart from Neil Pedo, whoever he is, seems a bit of a villain. One reader describes the sound of finishing typing as MMM. Very descriptive. And finally, someone agrees with the Carmageddon review, saying it's great and fast and gory, which it was. Proper bit of fun, that game. Someone else just wants their name in the magazine. Anywhere will do. Matey, Rigu. Then there's the Bargain Hunter section. Always good for a cheap game. This month it's listing deals from Woolworths, Special Reserve, The Games and Toys R Us. Woolies had Zelda, Ocarina of Time for a tenner, bargain that. Wave Race 64 for a tenner too, and DK64 and Wave Race also for about a tenner each at different Woolies, showing off different stores, fair enough. Special Reserve was doing membership for $6.99 and you got a free gift, plus they had DK64 and the expansion pack for 30 quid, Turok 3 and F1 World Grand Prix for around 30 and 8 quid respectively, alright prices for then. The game shop had a phone number to ask about demo prices, but standard games were 15 quid each or 2 for 20. They listed Banjo-Kazooie, DKR, F1 WGP, GoldenEye, Mario 64, Zelda, Jet Force Gemini, and Mario Kart, plus SNES and Game Boy Color games. Good selection there for the older consoles as well. Toys R Us had Wipeout 64 for 5 quid, can't complain at that. Worry. Lastly, there's the So Tell Me This bit, answering readers' questions. Someone's asking about PAL and NTSC, explaining that NTSC is for America, Japan and Canada, and PL is for Europe and most of the world, explaining why US and Japanese games don't work on UK consoles. Basic stuff really. Another reader wants to know where to get an official N64 controller pack. They suggest calling Nintendo's UK distributor. Simple as that. Someone else is wondering about a Dragon Ball Z game on the N64, and the answer is basically no, because the people who made V-Rally and Mission Impossible acquired the rights to make Dragon Ball games, but only based on the anime series, so nothing on the N64 unfortunately. Bit of a shame, that would have been good. Someone's asking about getting Warlocked for the Game Boy Color from the US, and they suggest CA Games who might import it, and give a number. And lastly, a question about GameCube releasing in Australia before Europe. They don't know but say it might be, and to look at 1080 degrees snowboarding while we wait. Random game to mention. Oh, and someone wants to know where the name Nintendo came from. No answer on that one though. There's a picture of Mario looking a bit cheeky next to the Bargain Hunter section, to grab your attention I suppose. This page is the board section, the reader's letters page of the magazine. We kick off with a reader from Milan called Seri, who got a basket of American food and was particularly amused to find Pokemon-shaped macaroni cheese in it, bless them. They've sent in a box and some of the pasta shapes which the editor, Ed, jokes were promptly nicked by Geraint for his tea. Then there's a letter titled, Loving GameCube, from Chris in Tyne Ware, who's clearly buzzing about the GameCube after reading the last issue. He's asking what Nintendo actually means, a fair enough question, and the magazine explains its history starting as a playing card company, and the meaning being something along the lines of work hard, but in the end it's in heaven's hands. Bit deep for a games company name, eh? They also plug a book called Game Over, about Nintendo's history, which I vaguely remember being quite good at the time. After that, there are some questions from Samir in London, wanting to know about Super Smash Bros. 2, whether RIQA has moved to GameCube, and where to get American games from. The mag is playing it coy about Smash Bros. 2, typical, saying they might see a sequel on GameCube. On RIQA, they say nothing is confirmed about moving to GameCube, and for import games, they point you to page 68 for more info. Cheeky plug. June. The rest of the page is showcasing readers' artwork. There's a picture of Pikachu, drawn by Alison from Lincoln. Rebecca Thompson from Kent has done a Majora's Mask piece. James Smith from Gloucestershire sent in some Hybrid Heaven fan art. Bristol's Tracy Chung has also done a Majora's Mask drawing. And finally, Helene Hagen from Norway has done a funny picture mashing up Pokemon and Zelda characters. It's all pretty good stuff, showing some real talent. And at the bottom, the address to send your Nintendo-related stuff to the magazine, if you were still sending letters back in February 2000, and one that is. This page is all about getting a bit cheeky with Perfect Dark on the N64, titled, How to See Things You Shouldn't. Looks like they're diving into the quirks, glitches and bugs that rare games like Perfect Dark were famous for, enough to make Carrington blush, as they say. Mark Green's the chap who's written this piece. They're reminding us that they gave Perfect Dark a whopping 96% back in issue 42. Reckon it was the N64 game to have if you could only have one. Big praise indeed. Gatty. This article, Video Nasties, is all about messing around with cutscenes. They've got 4 sections: looks, cheats, kills and scares. For looks, it's about finishing missions with your cloaking device on, or with the Farsight rifle's targeting view active, or even using X-ray or night vision to see how Joe looks in the final scenes. For cheats, they mention using the small characters cheat, and watching the cutscene at the start of the Datadyne research level where Joe bashes a guard. Apparently, it's even funnier with tiny characters. Who knew? Gwegby. Kills is about setting up laptop guns or mines just before you trigger the end of a level, to get some amusing cutscene effects. Classic glitch exploitation that was. And lastly, scares is a bit of a weird one. If you go to the Area 51, escape intro screen and press start anytime, apparently Joanna and the guards briefly appear lying dead on the floor. Spooky stuff, they say. They've even got a little what we said box, reminding everyone of their original review score. It's funny looking back now, games back then were full of these little oddities, and we loved finding them. Part of the fun was exploring every nook and cranny to see what you could break or find. Good times. This page is all about causing a bit of mayhem in Perfect Dark, specifically in the Carrington Institute. It's called Institute Insanity, which is pretty apartment. The page is dishing out tips for messing around in the shooting range. First up, there's a clever trick using the laptop gun. Apparently if you throw it at the wall and mess about with the start button you can have it in sentry mode and still pick other weapons. Nifty. Then there's a bit about using Joanna's ample frame to wedge doors open, which is a bit cheeky for a kids magazine. In it, they suggest filling staff with bullets and arrows. Classic, Perfect Dark fun. There are also tips on moving crates around to make weapon stashes, and even blowing them up with mines, a boombox they call it. A bit further down, they're talking about using the Slayer to fly out of the map through the windows, which sounds like a right laugh to explore. And for those with the Farsight, you can apparently take potshots at staff outside. Lovely. The plus section has even more japes. They mention wedging the gadget room door open in Campspy training to zoom around, pausing and unpausing for record times in training. Bit of cheating really, isn't it? There's a funny one about punching Daniel in the face during cloaking device training, after turning off the cloak. Bit harsh on old Daniel. A hoverbike glitch is mentioned, and disarming guards in Holo Training 7 to nick their guns. Then there's a section about traitors in Datadyne Central, where you can apparently trick guards into fighting each other. Sounds like a right bit of cheeky fun to watch those Pelagic 2 guards turn on each other. Good times. There's a few screenshots showing off these antics: laptop gun sentry mode, arrows sticking out of staff, and guards scrapping. All in all, a good page for causing some chaos in Perfect Dark. This page is all about Perfect Dark quirks, a top 10 list no less, from Graham Beach of Sunderland, Andrew Simmons of Hampshire and Alex Williams of Colwall. These guys were clearly digging deep into Rare's spy shooter back in the day. The list kicks off with saving time in Skidar ruins, a nifty shortcut they reckon. Then there's a warning about singeing Joanna Dark's backside on the hoverbike. Health and safety wasn't big in the 2000s, was it? There's also a bit about using the hoverbike to get through Datadyne research tunnels untouched by the ceiling guns. Cheeky. They talk about using the all-weapons cheat to cheese the Farsight rifle for rapid aiming with the hoverbike, which sounds a bit like cheating, even for glitches. Apparently you can zoom to beyond the sun outside the airbase level. Bit of a stretch, lads. Beyond the sun? Then there's cheese hidden in every level, because why not? Quab. One trick is about reloading the shotgun in deep sea and stepping through a teleporter to get 10 shells in a 9-shell weapon. Bit of an exploit if you ask me. If you pick up 2 magnums, you can apparently fiddle about and end up with 1 magnum containing 7 bullets. Sounds like a programming mishap. Shooting wine bottles in Carrington's villa is another quirk. Apparently he shouts, "Act your age, Joanna." If you do it, and they ponder why the bottles are empty. Deep thoughts, eh? And finally, 7 bullets in 1 magnum is apparently something Bond would be thrilled about. Standards were low for 007 back then if that's the case. 80. Below that, they've got a section called People Do the Funniest Things, giving more daft ideas. Failing the airbase mission and shooting a bloke next to the safe to make him cry and sit down. Bit harsh. Opening the door to Carrington in his villa, and quickly closing it so you're free to explore. Another glitchy exploit. Using Mayan helpers in war mode as makeshift shields, because they freeze mid-air. Ruthless but effective, they say. Leaping on top of Elvis on the elevator at the start of attack ship, and apparently he'll be killed inexplicably. Dark humor there. Destroying the taxi in Chicago after it's reprogrammed. Then civilians are invincible. Handy, they say. For what exactly? And lastly, shooting a guard twice with the crossbow. Once sedative, then instant kill for a double death animation. Bit brutal, but hey, it's Perfect Dark. Seems like they're just messing around and finding all the silly things you can do in the game. Good times. This page is all about the secrets and glitches in Perfect Dark. Proper sneaky stuff. It's called Behind Closed Doors, which is quite fitting. We've got sections on Skidar engine room, Institute exterior door, hangar doors, DD bottom door and DD lobby. All the usual haunts in Perfect Dark. They're giving tips on how to get to hidden areas, like luring a Skidar in the engine room and unlocking doors in the Datadyne building. There's a section called Miscellaneous, which is a bit of a catch-all, talking about looking for UFO tunnels and doppelgangers and shooting the autopilot in Air Force One. Then there's a wonky weapons bit, focusing on glitches with the weapons. Rocket Mania shows you how to fire rockets upwards that come back down, and Laptop Fun is about using the laptop gun in duel missions. They've also got Crossbow Eye and Crossbow 2 Feet, which sound like some fun crossbow tricks in the Carrington Institute and Airbase. Down at the bottom there are little tips with screenshots. Things like using the Phoenix to mess up a guard's face, using the Psychosis gun on someone sat down, firing rockets at the Carrington Villa guard, remote mines in the Institute, and keeping a guard pinned in Pelagic 2. Finally, there's a weird one about using the KL0131 to reincarnate a guard. Sounds a bit bonkers but typical Perfect Dark trickery. All in all, a page of cool little secrets for Perfect Dark fans wanting to dig deeper. Some proper cheeky ways to mess around with the game. This page is showing us some top tips for Perfect Dark, proper sneaky ways to cheat and rack up those ranks. It's got a Rise Up the Ranks guide, which is all about getting a load of kills and capture the case. Basically, you set up a game against a bunch of meat sims in Felicity, fill all your weapon slots with remote mines, and then keep restarting until the case is in the toilet shaft. Sneak in there, plant the mines, and then detonate them when the sims go for their case. Apparently you can get thousands of kills doing this, which seems a bit excessive, even for ranking up. Then there's a complete any challenge cheat. This one's a bit convoluted, involving custom scenarios and 2 controllers. The idea is to make a scenario you can't lose with meat sims and big weapons, save it as cheat, and then load it with player 2's controller whilst highlighting the proper challenge with player 1's. Press A and B on the separate controllers and apparently, Bob's your uncle. Challenge completed. Sounds a bit fiddly, but if you're stuck on one of those harder challenges in Perfect Dark, I suppose it could be tempting. There's also a swap weapons trick for customizing your save files. You can set up a custom scenario with whatever guns you fancy, save it, then reset, load a different save file and load the first save again, and apparently you'll have those weapons permanently. Useful for tailoring your weapons in Combat Simulator's random setting. Combat Craziness highlights some multiplayer quirks, like forming a human tower in Temple to get out of the level, or floating off the edge of pipes in a 2-player game using the vertical lift. And apparently shooting an ammo box makes it reappear in mid-air, which the Mayan players can't reach. They call that a laugh. Finally, There's a nitpicking bit pointing out Joanna doesn't have a reflection in Carrington Institute, or the Skadar assault ship, which is a bit of an oversight, isn't it? And the wine bottles in Carrington are lying down flat, which is correct storage apparently. Oh, and the Slayer gun was designed by Skadars, but it uses the same sight as human-built guns. Just some little bits and bobs for the real eagle-eyed players, I suppose. This page from Club 64 is all about some cheeky combat gun glitches and mysteries in Perfect Dark. Right at the top, it's detailing combat gun glitches to maximize your weapon use with some handy tidbits. Ducha. Warisa. First up, it's the knives. Apparently, if you've got double combat knives, you can select the poison knife function, and then press Z until Joe's holding both blades poised. Then, holding B and letting go of Z lets you slash a player and poison them ready for when they are reincarnated. Bit morbid, innit? Nasi. Next, the laptop gun. Apparently in Sentry mode, it holds as much ammo as you leave it with. In multiplayer, wandering nearby and pressing B to grab it refills the gun with 200 bullets. Useful to know, that is. Rieh Shahi. Then there's the RCP-120. Grab one and cram it with a maximum of 800 bullets. Press B and Z to cloak, then let go of B and hold Z to keep firing. When the ammo runs out, it can't reload, but you'll stay invisible until you let go of the button. That sounds like it could be a bit of a game breaker in multiplayer if you ask me. Warrington's. Lastly, for the glitches, it's the Magnum. Apparently normally it can shoot through some walls, but not all. However, if you switch on the X-ray scanner while aiming through impenetrable doors and walls, the bullets will fly right on through. Handy for those tricky spots, I suppose. Moving down the page, there's a section called Spotted. It says with an eagle eye, all kinds of Perfect Dark in-jokes and errors reveal themselves. Apparently, if you watch the intro cutscene carefully, you should be able to spot a Rareware logo inside the dropship. They were always ones for sneaking their logo in somewhere, weren't they? There's also a point about the word shouldn't supposedly missing an R, and designer Ross Burry's initials being all over the shop, including Datadyne Research and the sewers in Chicago. Cheeky Ross. And you can use the Farsight to peer inside the weapon shrine near the end of Skadar ruins and see a minute laptop computer inexplicably hidden within the stonework. These guys, eh? Paka. Finally, there's an It's a Mystery section. 6 months on, and these things are still causing headaches. Can we shed any light? It asks. Paka. First mystery is the necklace. Apparently, if you quickly see off the first 2 assault ship Skadars, Cassandra will leave her necklace behind. Grab it, check your inventory, and a mysterious password and username are revealed. Next, the passwords. If you can work your player up to level 1 in the combat simulator, another password and username are shown. They are Entropic Decay and Zero Tau. What could they mean? Who knows, eh? Lastly, the Norsa boxes. There's a hole to drop down in the warehouse. Look up with the Farsight or X-ray scanner to spy an ammo crate with Dolsa emblazoned upon it. And there's another in a corner of the sewers. Why? More mysteries for us to ponder, it seems. Typical Perfect Dark. Loads of secrets tucked away. This page is all about how to master Mickey Speedway USA on the N64, headlined with a bit of a cheeky dig at Mickey Mouse as a big-eared rodent. It's presented as a masterclass on cruising the land of the free, which is a bit of a grandiose way to describe a cartoon karting game, even for back then. Written by Geraint Evans, it dives into the game, mentioning how it tries to match the tire-screeching thrills of Mario Kart 64. They even bring up Rare's Diddy Kong Racing as another benchmark, suggesting Mickey Speedway USA at least shares something with those games, being unforgiving with tracks and rivals that could make grown men cry. Bit dramatic, but you know how mags could be back then. There's a What We Said box highlighting their review score from the previous issue, issue 50, giving it a solid 80%. They called it a worthy, if often terrifically unoriginal rival to Mario Kart, which is a fair enough summary really. It was decent, but let's be honest, it wasn't reinventing the wheel. There are a couple of little tips boxes dotted around too. One says, "Attaboy Mickey," and talks about becoming a platinum kid, suggesting you still have work to do to master it. Another, "This spritzer," implies using the spritzer power-up to help Louis catch up, and reinforces that skill and concentration are key. You know, the usual racing game advice. Overall, it's pushing Mickey Speedway USA as a serious kart racer on the N64, even if it was always going to be in Mario Kart's shadow. This page in N64 Magazine from back in February 2001 is all about Mickey Speedway USA. It's got a guide to finding those pesky stolen kart parts, which unlock extra tracks. Seems like they were getting loads of questions about it. For the spark plug, you're told to head to Indianapolis's tunnels, Do a 180, and look for a support. Cooling fans in Philadelphia, in the largest crate area. Battery in Chicago near the vertical supports, and the engine is in Malibu at the brown tunnels on the first turn. Simple enough if you knew where to look, eh? Then there's a section of top racing tips. First up, characters. Apparently the lady racers are the best because of handling and acceleration. Mickey and Donald are decent all-rounders, and Goofy and Pete are for experienced players who crash a lot. Louie is mentioned as top tier if you unlock him. Hack. Tip number 2 is boost start. Accelerate just after the third light for a speed boost, a welcome advantage, naturally. Power sliding is tip number 3, described as essential, and you need to yank the stick and gently edge it into the turn Mario Kart style, they say. Weapons is tip number 4, and they are honest enough to say they are rubbish, but can be used. Splolcher and Baseball Chucker are mentioned, and the advice is to use speed boosts instead. Lastly, token delivery is tip number 5, and they suggest collecting tokens to improve your speed over time, and to memorize the locations for later stages. All pretty standard racing advice for the time, but handy if you were struggling with this karting game, I suppose. The next page features How to Club 64, which is always handy for a bit of extra guidance. This time, they're tackling Diddy Kong Racing. It's split into 2 sections, Motorway Mania and Freeway Phobia, which I suppose are the 2 cup categories in the game. For Motorway Mania, covering tracks like LA, Alaska, Las Vegas and Philadelphia, the tip is all about power sliding. Standard stuff really, you'd be power sliding around every corner in Diddy Kong Racing, if you wanted to get anywhere fast. They even say it's easy, which is a bit cheeky, but fair enough for the first cup. The hotspots give specific tips for each track. Alaska has a tunnel shortcut, Vegas needs a jump at the start, and Philadelphia is about grabbing items and dropping them on the CPU races in the crate section. Then there's Freeway Phobia, with Dakota, Seattle, New York and Chicago tracks. Again, power sliding is key, but here they mention tighter cornering and hitting speed boosts. They reckon weapons aren't as important, which is a bit debatable. A well-aimed rocket can always change things. The hotspots get a bit more detailed here. Seattle is about dropping down early from the car park section, New York has a hidden speed boost after the tunnel, and Chicago has a purple room jump for a speed boost and big air. Bonzer, they say at the end of the Chicago tip. Bit much lads, but the advice is solid enough. Good basic tips for anyone struggling with Diddy Kong Racing, though if you were still struggling with Diddy Kong Racing by issue 51, you might have bigger problems. The next page is all about Mickey Speedway USA. Seems like they're giving us the lowdown on how to master a couple of sets of tracks within the game. We're kicking off with Victory Vehicles, which sounds rather grand, doesn't it? The tracks are Yellowstone, Washington DC, Everglades and Malibu. For top tactics, they're saying concentration is key, corner tightly, watch out for dirt slowdowns, and those pesky CPU characters aren't exactly playing fair. Apparently, it's also going to be tricky with obstacles and multiple paths. And if a CPU racer is getting too close, they recommend flipping to reverse view and letting rip with a baseball chucker or Spock to weapon. Classic cartoon violence, eh? Moving on to hot spots for Yellowstone, they point out that boost before the jump is a prime weapon dropping spot. Lay one down there to mess with rivals going for the jump. There's also a speed boost hidden behind some rocks to sniff out. For Everglades, it's all about muddy water naturally. Stick to the right side of the track to avoid the slow stuff and find a path around it. Apparently CPU racers are a bit daft and get stuck in the mud, meaning you can leave them eating your dust. Malibu's hotspot involves a spritzer character, and taking a shadowy shortcut in the crate-filled area after the first hills. Keep central driving between 2 crates, and then a quick left at the end. Sounds like a bit of a faff to remember, but probably shaves off a few seconds if you can nail it. Then we're on to Frantic Finale, which sounds like the proper endgame stuff. Tracks are Hawaii, Oregon, Texas and Colorado. Top tactics here are all about character handling, and they suggest Louie if you've unlocked him. Power sliding is key for these tight corners, especially in Texas and Hawaii, as there are lots of sheer drops. And watch out for CPU racers overtaking at the last minute. Apparently they are prone to doing that. Best to hold on to a decent weapon for the final stretch. Cool. In hot spots for Hawaii, the advice is hairpin turns and coconuts everywhere, naturally. Stick to the track edge and power slide early. Steer left or right to dodge the coconuts. Louie is apparently the man for these bends again. Oregon's hotspots are narrow sections, grassy paths to tunnels, and bridges over lakes, ideal spots to drop power-ups as CPU racers are forced to go over them. They suggest plenty of splotters if you get the lead early. Finally, Colorado is all about a perilous bridge over a chasm. There's a flat section before a jump, then leap right as you hit the ramp to clear a cutout section. Sounds a bit risky, but probably worth it for the shortcut. All in all, pretty standard racing game advice really, but good to have it all laid out for Mickey Speedway USA. This page is all about playing import N64 games, something we were quite keen on back in the day. It's explaining why you might want to bother importing games from Japan or America, mainly because the UK was a bit starved of certain titles, like they mention Harvest Moon 64 and Sin and Punishment as examples of games we might not see officially released over here. They're talking about the different tele systems, PAL and NTSC, and how that affects things. Apparently, Japan and the US use NTSC, and we're on PAL, which has fewer lines but a slower refresh rate. Who knew, right? To play these import games, you'd need a converter cartridge, like the N64 Passport they show. It's basically a way to bypass the region locking on the N64. They mention that it's a bit of a grey market thing, not exactly Nintendo approved, but widely done and legal enough. They also touch on technical stuff like signal formats and transformers, but thankfully they don't go too deep. There are some screenshots from Mario Party 2 to show the differences between PAL and NTSC versions, with mentions of letterboxing and ghosting issues you'd sometimes get with conversions. They joke about bygone days of dodgy converters, implying things have improved a bit, which is probably true. They also mention games like 64 Osumo and Susume, Taisen Puzzle Dharma as examples of Japanese games worth importing. The article is by Alan Madrell, and he's setting the scene for getting into import gaming just as the GameCube is on the horizon, which is quite timely considering the Japanese GameCube launch is not far off, as they say. It's all about getting your hands on those tasty foreign delights. This page is all about getting your hands on an NTSC N64 and playing import games, which was a bit of a faff back in the day, but totally worth it for some of the gems we were missing out on. It starts off with advice on importing an American or Japanese N64 console, suggesting you phone up importers like CA Games or Another World. They were the go-to places for getting your import consoles and games, weren't they? They'd sort you out with a console for around £120 quid, controllers and all that. The article then gets into the nitty-gritty of voltage differences, because US and Japanese consoles run on 110 volts, while we're on 240 volts in the UK. Cleverly, they point out you can just use the power brick from your PLN64, or get a step-down transformer if you really want to use the original power supply. Bit of a faff, but necessary if you didn't want to fry your new console. They also mention TV compatibility, saying you'll need a telly with SCART, composite or S-video, which most TVs had by then thankfully. The second half of the page moves on to playing import games on your UK N64 using a converter cartridge. These things were lifesavers, allowing you to play games from the US and Japan without needing a whole new console for every region. They specifically mention the Passport Plus 2i, which was a popular one. You had to stick a PAL game in the back of it, then the import game on top, a bit like a piggyback system. They do warn about potential data loss issues with save games on these converters, which was always a risk. There's also a little sidebar about importing Japanese Game Boy games, saying there are no regional differences, except for deciphering all that Japanese text, especially in Pokemon Gold and Silver. They do mention Pokemon Crystal having a slightly different compatibility issue with its mobile phone adapter in Japan, a very niche problem, even for import enthusiasts. Lastly, they have a don't miss section recommending import games, listing Custom Robo, Sin and Punishment, Harvest Moon 64, 64 Osumo, Mario Story, StarCraft 64 and Tamagotchi World 64. Some solid choices there. Sin and Punishment was a real hardcore shooter that was hard to come by over here at the time, and Custom Robo was a pretty unique robot battling game. Harvest Moon 64 was always a good chill-out farming sim, and Mario Story, well, Paper Mario as we know it now, that was always worth a look. Good times, messing around with import consoles and converters. This page is all about cheat codes for Banjo-Kazooie, good old Rare at their best, eh? It's got a big headline, Tips Extra, and then exclusive Banjo-Kazooie codes. Apparently, these codes were discovered by some folks named Al Pierce, and someone called Kleiman from New Jersey, over in the USA, bless 'em. They spent ages finding them apparently. It explains how to enter the codes. You have to go to Treasure Trove Cove, find Leaky the Bucket, do some egg firing, defeat a crab, and then spell out BANJOKAZOOIE. Classic Rare convoluted stuff. Once you've done that, you can enter the cheats listed. They even say you could just bash out cheat first if you want it even easier. Good grief. Then it goes on to list a load of cheats. There's one to open note doors, note door 2, note door 3 get in for free, note door 4 and note door 5 is beat. Very cryptic typical cheat code nonsense. Then there's stuff like raise pipes near Clanker's Cavern, and open grills and breakable walls. There's also one to remove gate and lid to Mad Monster Mansion Crypt, and open Treasure Trove Cove, and open Clanker's Cavern, open Mad Monster Mansion, open Gobi's Valley, open Click Clock Wood, open Freezy Peak, and open Bubblegloop Swamp. Blimey, that's a lot of levels to open up early if you fancy it. It also mentions some other cheats like remove webs that block doors, smash the eye on Grunty Face, raise water level, reveal Click Clock Wood Jiggy Podium, and remove Ice Cube blocking Freezy Peak picture. So quite a few handy things there if you were stuck, or just wanted to mess about. There are some screenshots of the game dotted about too, showing the areas they are talking about like Treasure Trove Cove and Freezy Peak. Yeah, cheat codes in games back then were something else, weren't they? Everyone huddled around magazines like this trying to scribble them down, hoping they actually worked. Good times. This page is all about Banjo-Kazooie tips. Proper good game that. They're showing you how to unlock all the colored eggs and the ice key in the game. Each section is dedicated to a different egg color: yellow, red, green, blue, pink and cyan, and then the ice key, each with a little screenshot and how to get it guide. For the yellow egg, it's in Click Clock Wood, in Nabnut's house, after going around the tree. The red egg is in Rusty Bucket Bay, in the captain's cabin. Gotta break a window to get in. Cheeky. Green egg is in Mad Monster Mansion in the bathroom. You're climbing drain pipes and going through Logo's toilet. Blimey. Blue egg is in Gobi's Valley, after using the shoes and flight pad to open a sarcophagus. Pink egg is in Treasure Trove Cove. Gotta fly to Sharkfood Island and get into the Sandcastle Tower. Cyan egg. Back to Mad Monster Mansion again, this time in the cellar, behind a barrel. And finally, the ice key is in Freezy Peak, needing the Talon Trot to get to Wadza's cave. Bull. Then there's a bit at the bottom called So What Next? Wondering what to do with the ice key and all the eggs. They reckon it might unlock a stop and swap screen and something to do with Heggy the Hen in Banjo-Tooie. They are asking if anyone knows, and to write into N64 Magazine if you've cracked it, promising a prize for the first person. Bit of a mystery back then, wasn't it? Good times trying to figure that all out. This page showcases the reader's top 15 tips, classic stuff from N64 Magazine, back when reader submissions were king. Looks like someone could win an Action Replay Equalizer Extreme, remember those? And an N64 pin badge, fancy. Gudda. Right at the top, tip number 1 is for Pokemon Stadium, naturally. Beating Mewtwo, a proper tough nut back in the day. The tip is to use Electrode, Persian, Miwoth, Tentacruel and Onyx, using specific moves. Sounds like a bit of a grind, but effective, apparently, according to Aaron Reynolds from Stockport. Beera. Next up is Perfect Dark, tip number 2. In the Institute level, it's about using the Devastator to save both people and destroy sensitive information. Standard Perfect Dark sneaky business. Darren Page from Swansea sent that one in. Chukka. Tip 3 is for WrestleMania 2000, good old wrestling games. This one's a bit of fun. Give Mark Henry DeLoe Brown's music and they come out to it. Bit of a novelty. Lenny Pepper via email sent that one in. Greasier. Number 4 is Castlevania, Legacy of Darkness, facing the first werewolf boss. Stand on the edge of the platform and dodge him into the water. Sam Wilding from Lincolnshire, keeping it simple. Many. Tip 5 is another Zelda, Ocarina of Time 1. As Child Link, get a bomb and go see the owl. Apparently he'll start talking. Seems a bit obvious. Does the owl ever shut up? Hugh Cox, via email with that gem. Many. Tip 6 is for TWINE. Remember that quirky little game? In Electra's mansion, get out of your room and poison someone, punch them and they disappear but not as dead. Matthew Halfpenny from Sutton, with that dark humor. Tip 7 is Perfect Dark again. In the Datadyne building, cloaking device and head to the floor with the guard and the 2 falcons. Push the desk against the wall and the plant. Gardening, eh? Hugh Cox again, prolific tipster. P. Tweety. Tip 8 is TYNE again. First level, shoot fire extinguishers, releases deadly foam. Shoot with high-powered gun, and they explode. Matthew Halfpenny again. Warrington Orchestra. Tawny. Tip 9 is Perfect Dark, Air Force 1 level. Guard in toilet. Throw timed mine at him and close door. Float in mid-air, after explosion. Jack Stewart, Birmingham. Classic Perfect Dark silliness. Tip 10 is WrestleMania 2000 again. Set your front turnbuckle strong grapple as powerbomb into turnbuckle. Irish whip someone into the turnbuckle by holding bottom C and you'll spin around aimlessly. Neil Chittenden, via email with that wrestling move. Warrington also has mill. Tip 11 is Perfect Dark, Datadyne building escape. Kill bottom floor guards, then lift, kill the guard. David O'Hagan from Northern Ireland with the straightforward approach. Tip 12, Zelda, Ocarina of Time again. Become adult, talk to Rolling Goron, exit cave, re-enter, talk again and float mid-air. Marzag, via email, sounds a bit fiddly but classic Zelda. Def 13, is Perfect Dark, onto Area 51. Ollie Nordling, Finland, just says get into Area 51. Very helpful. Tip 14, Jet Force Gemini. Pick up Tribal Lantern when he drops it. Flamethrower ammo. Daniel Grimes, Leeds, useful if you're running low on firepower. Last tip, number 15, Perfect Dark, Area 51 again. Escape, wake Elvis. Up to computers, activate them, don't work, go speak to Elvis, run back, activate computers again, mission complete in half the time. Ollie Nordling again, this time with a more detailed tip, Jacke. And at the bottom, a form to send in your own top tips, in case you wanted to be featured and maybe win that pin badge. Good times. This page has got a feature called Game On, listing 8 challenges to test the best, well actually 4 on this page, focusing on Perfect Dark, Turok 3, and Jet Force Gemini. Right at the top there's a bit of festive cheer mentioning Christmas is over, and games are still here to entertain. Bit of a dig at NAF Christmas Presents too, very relatable. Roingtonton, first up is a Perfect Dark challenge called Slow Shot Robot. Apparently, Christopher Reevy from Switzerland came up with this one. It's all about sharpshooting those pesky cleaning bots in the airbase, but you get to use cheats like all weapons and invincibility to make it a bit easier. Cheeky! You've got to use the Magnum pistol, and it's supposedly tricky, but satisfying when you pull it off. They've got medal awards for this, gold for destroying 4 or more, silver for 3 and bronze for just 2. Fair enough. Then we've got Turok 3, Shadow of Oblivion with Raptor Hunt. This one's from Ian Lawrence of Ipswich. Sounds like a laugh this. 2 players. One team controls raptors, the other are hunters. It's all handicaps and 10-minute time limits. You need to rack up raptor kills, and you get medals for it. Gold for 15 or more, silver for 14-10, and bronze for up to 9. Turok 3, bit darker than the previous ones if I recall, but the raptors were always good fun. Ori. Next, it's back to Jet Force Gemini with Run Lupus, Run. Chris Smith from Durham is the brains behind this one. This is a 2-player challenge on close quarters in Jet Force Gemini. One player is Lupus, and the other player is anyone else, both with weapons on heavy. Lupus has to leg it to the rooftops, and the other player has to hunt him down. It's a stopwatch job to see how long Lupus can survive. Medals for minutes survived, gold for 2 minutes, silver for 1.5, and bronze for just 1 minute. Jet Force Gemini, proper rareware classic that was, minutes. Finally, another Perfect Dark one, Cop Shop, from Michael Rose from Manchester. This is a 4-player challenge in the mines. One player is the police officer, with only remotes and a pistol, the other 3 are the bad guys, only with pistols. The cop has to catch them, and put them in the toilets, which is a bit grim even for Perfect Dark, isn't it? Medals for wrongdoers incarcerated, gold for 3, silver for 2, and bronze for just 1. Perfect Dark really was the game for multiplayer mayhem back then, wasn't it? This page from the magazine, titled Club 64 8 Challenges to Test the Best, is all about putting your N64 skills to the test. We've got a few game challenges cooked up here for readers to try out, and they're asking for folks to send in their own bonkers ideas too. First up is Lilac Wars, or Star Fox 64 as our American mates call it. This Corneria challenge is from a Chris Lowe. The idea is to complete the first level, Corneria, without getting hit once, and without firing your lasers until you reach the boss. Sounds like a proper test of your R-wing skills and stick work, doesn't it? They're talking medals for completing it, depending on the view and difficulty, so they're making it a proper competition. Then there's a GoldenEye 007 challenge called Bald Guards, sent in by some chap named Harry Wilson. You've got to use Invisible Bond and All Guns cheats, head into the Bunker 2 level, and use your watch laser to knock the hats off all the guards without killing anyone. Medals are up for grabs based on how few kills you manage, so it's about precision and not going all guns blazing. Crate Footy is a 4-player game in Warehouse, where everyone has invincibility and unlimited ammo cheats on an RCP, 120 weapons. Each player grabs a hover crate, and you have to shunt it into your opponent's goal wall. Sounds like daft fun for a laugh with mates. They're dishing out ranking medals for 1st, 2nd and 3rd place. No crates. The other Perfect Dark challenge is Ammo Bandits, also for 4 players in a favorite arena. This one's about collecting weapons, but there's a catch with different sim types and weapon limits. The goal is to grab all the guns and ammo within 10 minutes without being killed. They've even ranked medal awards based on how many guns and ammo you managed to get. Bit more strategic this one, you need to be quick and avoid getting blasted. Ew! Down at the bottom, it's asking for readers to send in their own challenge ideas, writing in 100 words or less. They're after challenges for Zelda, Majora's Mask, WWF No Mercy, The World Is Not Enough, and Mickey's Speedway. A right mixed bag of games there. They'll print the best ones, and you get a pin badge. Not bad for a bit of N64 creativity, eh? And yeah, that's Mario pointing at the challenges section as usual, and it's February 2001, page 75. Good times. This page is all about the latest games coming to the N64. Right then. We've got a big shout out for Pokemon Puzzle League. Looks like they're giving it a proper UK review, which is good to see. It's a puzzle game. Obviously, with all the Pokemon characters, Ash and Pikachu are front and center there. Bit of a change of pace from the usual Pokemon games. It's got those gameplay screenshots, looking a bit like Tetris Attack, which was a solid puzzler back on the SNES, so hopefully, this one is decent too. Bitcha. Then down below there we've got Mario Party 3. Seems like they've playtested it for us, cheers lads. Mario is dressed as a cowboy, what's that about? More minigames I suppose, it's Mario Party, you know what you're getting. Good for a laugh with your mates, but probably best in small doses. This page is basically saying there are some new games on the way for the old N64, even if it's starting to feel a bit like they're scraping the barrel with spin-offs and party games. Still, something to keep us going until the next big thing comes along, whatever that might be. This page of Planet 64, issue 52 it is shouting about Majora's Mask being tipped, which means they're going to give away all the secrets, right? They've got the usual review section with Indiana Jones, Mega Man 64, and Star Wars Episode 1 Battle for Naboo. Indiana Jones, another movie tie-in game, some were alright, some were terrible. Mega Man 64, that's the 3D one, wasn't too bad if I recall. Battle for Naboo, well, Star Wars games were 10 a penny at this point. Then they're teasing exclusive picks for Pokemon Stadium Gold and Silver, wonder if there's anything new to see there. Eternal Darkness, now that one looked interesting, bit spooky for Nintendo. And blimey, Conker's Bad Fur Day, looking very colourful as ever. And a whole lot more besides, they say, always with the promises. Down the side, they're banging on about Skill Club Millennium results and tons of new tips and cheats. As if we needed more cheats, the internet was overflowing with them by now. Best Special Investigations. Sounds intriguing. Probably some deep dive into some rumor or something. GameCube and GBA news, that's the future, isn't it? Getting us ready for the next general. The only reviews you can trust. Bit full of themselves, aren't they? Absolutely free. A book of tips for 2 N64 games. They don't say which games though, bit of a mystery. Next month in Planet Game Boy looks like Little Mermaid Pinball and Pocket Soccer are being reviewed. And they're tipping Mario Tennis and Tom and Jerry for the Game Boy Color. Seems like a lot of handheld stuff next issue. February 2001, issue 97 apparently. Right at the end of the N64's life really, but still trying to keep us interested it seems.